Welcome everybody to the CQC Public Board meeting. This is on the 24th of September for those watching on catch up, but it is live streamed, as people know. I have a couple of apologies. Michael Meyer, who's one of the non-executive directors, can't be with us this afternoon, and Alex Caffetz is going to have to leave before the end, and Joyce Frederick, who usually joins us as Director of Policy and Strategy, is unable to be here today. But on the other side, the welcome and introductions. The really good news is we've got a full suite now of non-executive directors and chief inspectors and executive directors. And so just to welcome specifically Ruth Owen, who was not here at the last meeting but is one of our NEDs, Richard Barker, who is an associate non-executive member who was not at the last meeting, and Chris Usher, congratulations on your appointment as Executive Director of Finance and Corporate Services, and Esther Provins, congratulations on your appointment as Chief Digital Data and Registration Officer. So they are full voting members of the board. Welcome to all of you. And then welcome on today to our Equalities Network rep, Drew Noble, and our Trade Union rep, Sue Seska. And then just to let people know about committee appointments, the Audit and Risk Assurance Committee, which is chaired by Kay Boycott, but that's an appointment made by the HSC. But on top of that, Melanie Williams is there as a non-executive director member, as is Ruth Owen. And then there are two independent members, Adebola Adebayo and Simon Millhouse. And then the other subcommittee of the board, the Regulatory Governance Committee, I am chairing that, at least for the time being, but I'm joined by Michael Meyer, NED, Alex Caffetz, NED, and Richard Barker, who's an associate NED. And then finally in all this list, to announce the CQC's non-executive director with responsibility for freedom to speak up, that is Ruth Owen again. So Ruth, thank you for taking that on. With that, I think we can move on to declarations of any conflict of interest, and I think the only person who hasn't yet had those read into the minutes is you, Richard Barker. Would you like to do that?
Yes, I have two current declarations. One is I'm on the governing body of Sunderland University, which has a major health faculty. I don't think it's a direct conflict between our role and the university, but many of the trusts that work with the university obviously are under the regulatory regime of the CQC. I'm also temporarily the SRO for the transformation programme, leading to changes in the Department of Health and Social Security and the NHS England, leading to the eventual abolition of NHS England. The conflict there is that DHSC obviously has an oversight role of the CQC, but my role is not in that space at all, but it is a potential conflict. A third, just as potential future conflict of interest, my daughter's a registered medical practitioner. She doesn't work in the UK at the moment, but I'm hoping that she will come back before long, in which case I won't have to declare that again.
You're very welcome. Thank you very much, Richard, and it's because of your role in the transformation of NHS England with the Department of Health and Social Care that you are currently an associate non-executive director, a non-voting member, but as and when you've completed that task, we will welcome you as a full non-executive director. Next question is there any urgent business that people want to raise? I haven't been informed of any, but now's the time to say so if there is. I'm not hearing anybody saying anything or seeing anybody. If that's the case, we can then go on to the minutes of the previous board meeting, public board meeting, and that was the one held on the 25th of June. First of all, any points of factual accuracy that people wanted to raise? Alex.
Sorry, Mike, it's just a very minor one, but my name's spelt wrong on page 1 and page 2 of the minutes.
So it is. Apologies, Alex Caffett. So we'll get that corrected. But thanks for spotting that. Any other points of fact? In which case, that's all okay. We can then move on to the actions arising and the action log. There was a point about the response to Ofsted inquest. That actually is going to be coming to the board in November. Is that right, Chris? Yeah. Excellent. So we can park that for today. The draft business plan was the second point, where we had to add baseline figures to the performance metrics. That's been completed, I understand. Chris Usher on this occasion, so we can close that one. Then there was the one about, again from the draft business plan, amending the metric on the percent of providers who have positive sentiment on the new portal as an improvement on the previous portal. Is there anything to say on that one, or can we close that one?
Thanks, Chair. Just, support the closure. We need to link that to our roadmap. So I think we have a way forward. Thank you.
And then the final one was on the dementia strategy and independent voice, but that's not due for a few months' time. So we can keep that open, but it's not active as yet. Good. Any other matters arising that people think we ought to have discussed? If not, we can go on to item 3.1, which is the summary of the Regulatory Governance Committee. As I've already noted, I am, at least for the time being, chairing that. Just to let people know, the RGC is taking a deep dive into the so-called foundational improvements that we have set for ourselves, but as Julian, you'll be mentioning those, I don't see any point in rehearsing that twice, so I'll leave that for you to cover in your Chief Executive report. But that is now underway. It's an important part of our work, and we will be coming back to it. Anybody want to raise anything on that one? If not, I think we move on to the audit and risk, and that's over to you, Kay.
Thank you. As Mike said, I'm the new chair of the Audit and Risk Committee. There hadn't been a meeting since March, so there were quite a number of items to receive and discuss. We talked with our external audit colleagues about the annual report and accounts and the approach to the year that's just completed, which is currently in progress. We received a fair number of internal audit reports and the annual audit opinion and discussed the issues raised from that. There was a reset and scrutiny of internal actions, internal audit actions, because there's quite a long list, and the committee was satisfied that the approach was proportionate going forward, but there will need to be quite a lot of continued monitoring there. We had updates on risk management and governance, and I think that's something we will return to both at committee and board. We had the annual report from the Senior Information Risk Owner and received that, and another report on incidents and complaints, which is going to be something that we are going to look at our approach. So I think that just gives a flavour of what the breadth of what's talked about, and will going forward. There was a running theme throughout, which is there's a lot on. And so the other area that kept coming up was around programme management and assurance, and being very clear about what is being done in what sequence, and then how we think about the risks that we're carrying in the meantime. But I'd say it was a bumper meeting, but we reset and felt that we're in now a good place of understanding where we are.
Thank you very much indeed, Kay, and actually thanks for a lot of work that's going into this from both you and other members of the Audit and Risk Committee. Any questions or comments that people wanted to make on that? Apparently not, so that's good. So, Julian, it's over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mike. Well, Good afternoon, everyone. I wanted to present the executive team report. Since we last met, there's been a lot happening, and just to add, Mike, to what you have already said, on the executive team, very pleased to note the appointment of Esther and Chris in their executive roles, as you've set out, and also to have around the table our 4 chief inspectors, which I think really signals and manifests the approach to our sector regulation to strengthen our expertise, credibility and insight in that area. So delighted to have us all together. Given that stability now has developed, that's allowed us to clarify some of the key cross-cutting roles that we need to play, and I would emphasise the importance that we do have that necessary expert sector leadership, but we also recognise the need for our 4 chief inspectors to work very much as a team, given the direction of travel for healthcare and indeed the importance of health and social care working particularly closely. I'll say a little bit more about that in the context of the 10-year plan. But just to emphasise organisationally how we're working as a team, pleased that Aaron has agreed to become our Caldicot Guardian. Thank you, Aaron. The Caldicot Guardian is, of course, responsible for safeguarding the confidentiality of information, ensuring it's used appropriately and ethically, upholding the Caldicot principles. I think important to have a member of the exec team at chief inspector level responsible for that. Esther, thank you for taking on the Senior Information Risk Owner. CIRO is the acronym, and the CIRO is responsible for overseeing our risk policy around information, implementing measures to manage those information risks, ensuring we comply with relevant data protection, GDPR and so on, and promoting information security. Very important at a time when we're conscious of many of the threats out there in relation to information security, and as a regulator in health and care, vital that we have a strong and serious approach to that. So many thanks, Esther. And very pleased that Bola has agreed to, Bola, of course, our Chief Inspector of Primary and Community Care, agreed to be the executive lead for neighbourhood health. And I think, again, a crucial at a time when we're seeing neighbourhood health be a key part of the 10-year plan, the direction of travel, and that's going to be an important role in terms of leading, working very much with other exec directors and chief inspectors, and indeed the whole organisation, to lead our thinking and development on that. So that really takes me to just saying something about our role in the 10-year plan. We have attached it as an appendix to the report. It is in the papers. Without going through it exhaustively, I did just want, though, to highlight the fact that at CQC we strongly support and welcome the 10-year plan. It does mark a significant shift in terms of that new model of care across the NHS, and indeed aligning with adult social care. And just to say, I think that you know, we are thinking hard about how we can enable and activate some of the important issues in the 10-year plan through our regulatory role, and how we organise ourselves to respond to some of those challenges. There's also, I think, an alignment with what we expect to see published in our State of Care report that we'll see later this autumn, which will highlight, I think, very clearly why we need that 10-year plan and why we need to make a reality of many of the things that it describes. So in specific terms, the plan, of course, highlights the 3 key shifts that need to happen across health and care, hospital to community, analogue to digital, treatment to prevention. And we will be responding to that and helping support that through 4 key areas of focus. So over the next 6 months, we will be resetting what good looks like and ensuring we provide the right timely response. We've had a lot of feedback from people that use services, from providers, from stakeholders about how we work, and we'll be taking account of that in the context of our work to look at how we assess organisations. Secondly, as a key component of our work, our data strategy and our evolution to a more modern data-driven regulator. There's a lot in the 10-year plan about the importance of data. It was very clear in the work on CQC specifically that we needed to think more about outcome data in the context of our work and our reports and our activity. So that is going to be a central part of how we support the evolution of the 10-year plan. Thirdly, strengthening our public-facing assessment and intelligence approach. So thinking about how we frame our assessments, how we make them understandable and clear, give good information to the public, reflect back the public's experience of care, treatment, and fourthly, our ability to adapt to neighbourhood-focused models of care, because albeit we have 4 chief inspectorates, we know that neighbourhood health crosses boundaries in respect of key service areas, so that emphasises the importance of the way we work as a team, and indeed, Bola, what you'll be working on in terms of how we respond to that as an organisation. So I think those are 4 key areas that are going to be central for us to help support the implementation and delivery of the 10-year plan, and no doubt there'll be much more on that to come as the delivery work streams are developed as part of the 10-year plan, but we're making sure that we're playing our part in terms of effective regulation and indeed our refreshed purpose around protecting people that use services, but also supporting providers and systems of care to improve. So, moving on to our work to improve what we're doing, we, as you rightly said earlier, Mike, we've been focusing very much on our 4 immediate actions and our foundational improvements. Now, I won't dwell on the 4 immediate actions because actually we've made a lot of progress there, and we can pick some of that up in the performance report that Chris will outline later, chief amongst which obviously is we are doing more inspections, which is a critical part of what we set out to improve. On the foundational improvements, these are really the underpinnings of a modern, credible, effective regulator in health and care. We've had a lot of work to do on our culture, and that has been, and there's been, I think, no accident or argument about the fact we very much started with reframing the organisation's culture, values, purpose, vision. I'm very grateful, and it's really good to have sat around the table Drew and Suze, because trade union colleagues, staff networks have been central to the work that we've been doing together on this. And I think that we're pleased that we've now crystallised our vision, our purpose, how we work through our shared values, and indeed our commitments to those that we serve. So we're making very clear commitments, which we'll be saying more about over the coming weeks and months, to the public, providers and systems of care, our people, and those partners who share our purpose. We launched that approach internally in July, but we're planning to take that out further. We're embedding that across the organisation, and I hope that, I'm sure some colleagues will be watching this board meeting, but you're starting to get a sense that as CQC, we are really focused on listening to the feedback that we've had and received, and on that ongoing basis, and responding in a way that makes sure we're putting our commitments around improvement, around expertise, around rebuilding our work centre stage. And I'd encourage all of you to feedback on how you think we're doing in relation to that. So that vision, that purpose, commitments and values will all play a key role in taking us forward. And now we've got our 4 chief inspectors in place, we've strengthened our expert sector-based leadership, we're working in a collaborative way to make sure when we revise our assessment framework, that hits the mark in terms of our stakeholders, providers, and makes it easier, frankly, for our valued colleagues to do their work, making sure we address some of the issues and challenges of the technology. So, on the specifics of what we will be doing over the coming weeks and months, integrating our regulatory leadership and operations, that's been a big piece of work. It's sort of reaching a point where we can see where we're aiming to get to in the not too distant future in terms of going through all of that. Again, I'm grateful to trade union colleagues, been working very closely with them on all of that. But that is all about making sure we're aligning our colleagues to the sort of chief inspector teams and making a reality of the recommendation to work as a sector-based regulator. That, I think, will obviously take us to a point where we'll have those teams in place. There'll be inevitably some challenges along the way, but we're doing our best to really make sure we're listening to colleagues, we're working closely with trade union colleagues, with HR, and indeed we've got Chris Zakiti doing a really important piece of work around managing that whole transition. And I think it's fair to say, Chris, we feel like we're making headway, and colleagues are starting to support and understand how we want to make a reality of that. So that's an important piece of work internally, but it will be felt, the benefit and impact of that will be felt externally, I'm sure. On the assessment approach, very important that we take full account of the reviews that we had the benefit of last year, particularly the gentleman to my left, at a different point, Mike, in terms of your work on the single assessment framework, Penny's review of our operational effectiveness, and the Care Provider Alliance report and that Vic Rayner convened, but very important messages from the care sector. All of those three things, together with the feedback from our own staff, have fed into the proposed consultation on revising our assessment framework. There's been a lot of feedback about the shortcomings of the single assessment framework and the way providers have experienced this, and indeed the experience for staff. So we're planning to make changes to that, but we want to ask through consultation, we want to ask some important questions about those changes and the way in which we make that clearer, simpler, more effective. And finally, alongside that, given the very, very clear failures in the organisation on technology implementation, it's absolutely critical we get that right. So the way that we attempt to tackle those issues, have a clear plan for taking forward the way in which our colleagues can use technology to assess and inspect is going to be critical. So all of the work on the regulatory platform, all of the work on the technology and data, we've got an indicative roadmap. The board are fully focused on this, and once that plan has worked through the appropriate governance, we'll be sharing that with colleagues more widely, and indeed giving a sense of exactly how we plan and over what time period we plan to make those improvements and changes, which will of course need to align with our assessment approach and the changes there. So in short, a huge set of challenges ahead, but I have to say, Mike, I feel positive about the fact that we're clear what we need to do. We're thinking hard about the phasing of that. We're learning the lessons of the past in terms of how we've addressed that, and we aim to work very much in the CQC way on taking forward these challenges and making sure we keep faith with the values, behaviours, purpose that we've collectively agreed on. So I'll stop there and happy to take any questions or indeed any of my exec colleagues to add to what I've said.
Thank you, Julian, very much for that. Let's open it up to any discussion. Are we heading in the right direction? Have we got the right fundamentals that we are considering? Any members of executive team or non-executives want to comment at all? remarkable silence around. Yes, thank you, Esther.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to add to some of Julian's comments around the technology and data roadmap. You'll see from the minutes from our last public board meeting, as well as colleagues and anyone who was watching that, we did discuss an indicative roadmap at our last meeting. Alongside that, we absolutely took a decision to socialise that and seek feedback across the organisation, both from our internal colleagues but also those from our external stakeholder groups. And one of the really kind of key pieces of feedback that came back, and Julian, I think you alluded to this, was the need to understand the relationship of our digital roadmap with the other foundation improvements. So you'll note from Julian's update that we are intending to publish a revised plan. That plan absolutely needs to respond and will respond to the feedback that we've received around that. But I just wanted to just be really clear, that plan absolutely does still acknowledge the real kind of pain our colleagues, both internally, but also our provider colleagues, are experiencing with our current technology. So that's absolutely in the forefront of our minds, and those kind of current challenges and the need to resolve this really underpin our new plan that will be released as soon as Julian said, it's gone through the appropriate governance. So hope that's a helpful addendum. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Esther. Very, very helpful. Chris.
Just wanted to build on one of the points that Julian mentioned around the redevelopment of our assessment framework, and to acknowledge the support and thanks that we've had from providers and from colleagues and from people who use services in the work we've done so far. So this is the development work that we're doing on this assessment framework now is built very much on the conversations we've had with colleagues, with providers and with people who use services over the last few months. And I know that many of those groups have been very supportive of the work that we've been doing to sort of re-look at what it means, what does it mean to have good services in the different sectors that we regulate. So it was just to thank you for those people who have been involved in that work, to recognise that there is still more work to do. We've got some work that will be led by the Chief Inspectors on the assessment frameworks in each of the sectors that we regulate, and that will need the support of our colleagues, providers and people who use services. And just to end on a point, some of the work we're doing are bringing those colleagues together, perhaps for the first time in a few months, to really think about what it means to be good in each of the sectors that we regulate in. That isn't just important technically, but it's important culturally to get the organisation and people who use services and providers back onto a common frame of reference.
Great. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Julian. Just really to build on some of the points that Julian was making there, myself and my Chief Inspector colleagues are delighted to be here, particularly as it pertains to restoring that subject matter expertise and actually sector expertise. We've heard loud and clear the feedback from providers and the system about the need for us to rebuild our credibility and the trust and confidence that both our public and providers have in the CQC. So we're delighted to be here to start leading the work to actually rebuild that trust. And also building on Chris's point about making sure that the tools and processes that we use, including the assessment framework, are fit for purpose for our colleagues at the front line, for providers who are being regulated, and indeed for the public to be able to be clear about the quality of care that they're receiving. And we're delighted to be really leading the charge in terms of bringing together the operational and regulatory functions of the CQC into a coherent whole that galvanizes behind those foundational improvements that we've talked about and the immediate actions that we need to take. So we're delighted to be here, very much looking forward to working with Julian and the rest of the exec and the board to drive those improvements forward.
Thank you, Bola. And just a couple of points from me. I really welcome the work that's getting going on what good looks like. That came through very strongly in the review that I undertook last autumn. There was a plea from the provider sector. That was providers in hospitals, providers in adult social care. They really wanted us to do that. So but that's been waiting till we had the chief inspectors to lead it, and it's great that we now have those chief inspectors. The other point I don't think actually you mentioned as yet, the consultation we're going to do on the assessment framework is within a matter of a few weeks now. It's coming up really quite soon. Jackie.
Just to add my thanks to Julian's, to staff networks and trade union colleagues. We have got such a lot of work where we are relying on each other. And I think certainly with trade union colleagues, I think we've got 15 work streams, which is significant. It's not lost on me that internal reps have a day job to do as well, and just really appreciate your pragmatic and supportive approach to everything that we're trying to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Julian. Thank you, Chair. We've a very positive road forward. I'm grateful for the steps that have been outlined in the papers and that have been and are being taken to move us in the right direction. I think, whilst undoubtedly positive, I'm really keen that we consider the continued disruption and challenges that our colleagues in the wider health and social care sector face. Very much welcome the organisation's consideration about the impact that these ongoing changes have, even whilst positive, and how we can make the improvements in a way that balances that effectiveness with the avoidable disruption at a time of already great stress on the sector at large. Thank you.
Thank you, Drew. Suze.
Thank you. I just wanted to add, I think you mentioned something, Bala, about establishing what good looks like. And I think some of the feedback from our members is that that's a great starting point, but as a regulator we should be pushing for improvements. And one of the challenges our inspector colleagues face is defining what outstanding looks like. So an inspector might go to a service and deem them outstanding, and then there's a challenge internally to get that published. And I think that whilst we're looking at what good looks like, we should be stretching to see what does this outstanding look like consistently, and how do we support our colleagues to identify that and to easily get that through the sign-off processes so we can celebrate the successes in the care sector. Thanks.
Thank you. I think that's a really important point. I think it will be easier when we have defined what good looks like to say what goes beyond that. And of course, it doesn't stay static over time. What might be considered outstanding now, in 3 or 4 years' time, might be quite routine and therefore be good, but that's a good thing, and then other things will come along that will be outstanding. That certainly was my experience when I was a chief inspector, so we'll keep that one under review, but there is some work going on that anyway. David.
Thanks very much, Mike. I just wanted to pick up, as this was the report from Julian. One of the very successful parts of the embedding of the CQC way, I think, has been the way in which the HR and people function has been handled within the organisation. And I say that because I think most ALBs are finding this probably the most difficult area to deal with. And it's an area that can sometimes be taken for granted. And I got personal experience of working closely with Jackie Jackson and her team on the work that they've helped us with HealthWatch. And HealthWatch is a very sort of dynamic small part, and we have very high morale. And because of the work with Jackie, and she's brought in the unions to this very significantly, we've maintained that high morale within the organisation. And we have a network of 153, and they constantly ask us questions about HR and people and how they should handle this, and what risks they take, etc. And I have to say that I found absolutely unfailing support from Jackie's team to help us with that. Where we've asked a question, we've had it answered immediately. Where they couldn't answer it and they've gone away, and you know what it's like, Julian, people say, well, we'll go away and we'll come back to you on that. They've always come back to us on that. And they've given us an answer that's actually rather better than the question that we posed to them in many cases. So because it's an area that when it works well, it's very easy to overlook. So I just wanted to make that point because some of my colleagues won't be necessarily as aware of it because they're not closely involved with it. But I think it's a great testament to your leadership, the executive team's leadership, and Jackie's leadership of that function.
David, thank you very much for those comments. Julian, anything else you wanted to add on this item?
Perhaps just to underpin, Mike, the importance of the consultation on that assessment framework and the fact that we expect over the coming weeks to be consulting with widely with colleagues on providers and stakeholders on that, given I think we are conscious of the time that's elapsed since you and Penny and others wrote those reports. We want to make, and indeed the concerns we get from our provider colleagues, and now we have chief inspectors in place, the ability to sort of positively address some of the issues and challenges with the current framework, and indeed in tandem address the significant issues, and drew attention to the problems that many of our colleagues are facing right now, to try to ease some of the challenges and burden on them as well, so that once we get through that, we'll be in a place where we've got a clear assessment framework supported by good technology that empowers and enables our colleagues to do their best work. So that's the goal, and we're on the cusp of getting out there with that with that consultation document. So thank you for highlighting that, Mike. Important to reinforce, I think.
Thank you, Julian. So I think that's all on that item. So we go on to item 4.1, and this is you, Jackie, to lead us off on equity, diversity and inclusion survey results and strategy. So we're just waiting for one other person to join us in the room. Welcome.
So this is Nadia Rahman, our Equality, Diversity, Inclusion Manager, who has to take a lot of credit for these reports. So it's right that Nadia's here to speak to us today. From my point of view, these are two really, really important papers. And we'll see in the papers, and I'm sure Nadia will bring them to life, that we're definitely making some inroads and improvements in this area. I'm not going to sugarcoat anything. We have a long way to go with where we want to be. But from our perspective, the conversations, the interest, the time and support from executive team members is really having an impact on what this is starting to look and feel like. So whilst the papers go some way to give an overview and a feel, I think it's very much about our collective commitment to an organisation, to the conversations, to the time, to the importance, against a backdrop of so many other priorities, as to how we do not take our eye off this really important area that we are absolutely committed to. So with that, I'm going to hand over to you, Nadia, just to bring some of this to life, and then we'll take some questions.
Thank you, Jackie. So I wanted to really talk about some of the structural levers that we need to pull this year so we can embed the EDI strategy and see some sustainable progress. So firstly, the organisation design and operations that will help to stabilise people's experiences, and it will help some of the talent development work and equitable experiences. secondly, the performance system that we want to refresh as part of the CQC way. That will be really, really important for objective setting and to help the work on freedom to speak up and bullying and harassment that we want to do. And then finally, the business plan. The business plan is actually very, very critical because there will be a cascade across the organisation, because people will be able to have clear objectives right from the top. That will help with our strategic workforce planning. It will help with objective setting, responding to all of the feedback that we've had in the survey around talent development and equal opportunities. It will also critically impact people's stress levels, because they'll feel less stressed because they have more clarity. And right now, there's a lot of ambiguity, and there's a lot of poor communication, and that's been fed back as experience through bullying. So we see in the survey annually, and this is pre the transformation, poor email tone, excessive criticism, micromanagement, colleagues being ignored. And so hopefully the business plan does help gain that stability, and then we're able to tackle some of these behaviours systemically. If we don't do that, especially with the performance refresh, there's a bit of a risk, because we could embed those behaviours, and then that will increase trade union colleague work, HR work. So we need to use the CQC way, all the inclusion learning, the leadership development work and colleague learning to really focus on challenging those behaviours. It's not just race and disability that we need to look at. This is wide-scale equalities, inclusion learning, especially because marginalised groups, they tend to feel bullying and discrimination if an organisation itself is going through a lot of struggles, because they have existing structural barriers in place. So it's really, really important that we think about that as we do all of the CQC way learning that we want to do. If you do have all of these levers aligned, you will start to see change as we come back to report on the strategy. Like as Jackie mentioned, we've seen some improvement. But if you pull the structural levers, you'll start to see more change, and you'll see more accountability as well from people.
Thank you very much indeed, Nadia. Jackie, back to you.
So I think going forward, we just need to also cross-check the points Nadia made around our structures, how we work with the chief inspectors as the head count is more manageable, and then we can look at how the interventions we've already put in place are having a positive impact, or are they having a positive impact. So the race training has had really good feedback, really positive, but it's about what next and what that means. So whilst we can absolutely encourage and focus on completion, that's only a small part of the story. So I think looking at all the interventions that we've got in place, thinking about our CQC way, our freedom to speak up focus, revision of policies, I think this is all through an optics of the colleague experience, and this forms a really, really important part.
Thank you, Jackie. I think we can open this up for discussion. And who would like to start off on this? Suze would like to.
Thank you. I just wanted to add on to what Jackie was saying there. I think that measuring the impact of these actions is key, because otherwise there's a lot of activity going on, and if we aren't measuring the impact of our resource and the output we're putting out there, on the impact it feels to individuals, yeah, we're not going to move that dial, as Nadia said. So I think as an analyst at heart, measurable outcomes is where I'd just be asking for us to focus with this sort of thing. What does it feel to individuals rather than a tick box on an action plan? Thanks.
I see a lot of support around the table as you said that. Melanie.
So I'm not sure if I'm going to be sort of answering this one or item 4.2 and 4.3, because it's a lovely set of reports, isn't it? So I do apologise, colleagues, for I'm sort of slipping across the papers, Jackie. But I think first it's really important to see this data, because one of our key roles as a board is to make sure there's that visibility, accountability and transparency. So thank you for bringing, in fact, all three of them, because it really reflects lived experience, which is so essential. I mean, I guess, Jackie, I was just really curious as to what else is needed? I'm sat here thinking as a non-executive director and ensuring we take this the next step, and it's, like I say, it sort of bleeds into the objectives that we've got into item 3. But is there anything else in terms of leadership? Because it seems there's a lot of actions below. It felt like there's lots of workforce actions, and I'm sort of really curious as to the governance actions that we may need to have in place to make sure we, we continue this visibility and delivery.
I agree with that, Matt. I think there is a lot of activity, but I think it comes back to oversight and ownership. And I do think as we move into a steadier state with established structures, and we look at some of the metrics around recruitment, training, opportunity, development, I think that's where we start to plug in even more metrics, and also interventions and training and scrutiny. And I think as we move forward, it feels to me as though that might be easier in the structures that we're pulling together. And also the fact that, as the first point I made, it feels as though from our perspective, and I'm sure Nadia would agree, we are pushing on an open door. At the moment, people are wanting to have conversations or are asking about, themed weeks, whatever it might look like. And I think it feels a much healthier conversation to have, and just have to build on that as well.
Julian.
Thanks very much, Jackie, Nadia. That was really good to hear your reflections. I was interested maybe in your response, and indeed other colleagues, I think particularly Susan and Drew, on when we look at the results. One thing that struck me, which I found interesting, was we've had that increase in positive sentiment about working at CQC. I think an increase of 27 percentage points on October of last year, and an improvement on psychological safety and confidence in efforts to build diverse teams. But set against that, decreases in the perception of equal opportunities for career progression, and fewer feel they're being treated with respect and fairness. I found that quite interesting sort of dichotomy in terms of how we can use this to really focus our efforts on bringing to life our values, behaviours, the way in which we move forward together. And it might come back to what you were describing about some of those levers. But I think I'm really interested in how we can derive the most benefit from what we know through the survey, because a lot of colleagues made time to fill it in and kind of take forward the learning or the action which we think are going to be needed to address the areas where we're falling short.
It will give clarity from the top on objectives, so right down to each directorate they'll be able to set clearer objectives, so then that will enable more equitable opportunities for career development, because at the moment if people are stressed and they're not quite clear what they need to do, sometimes as humans, because of bias, when a project comes in, you might automatically be giving it to the person that you know will be able to deliver, but then that inadvertently does not give other colleagues who are more than capable to deliver, and it will create that cycle. Because it's interesting, last year we had a lot of pilot projects during recovery mode, and yet people have fed back that there wasn't a lot, they didn't feel equal opportunities, but there certainly should have been lots of opportunities with a number of projects that happened. And when I speak to people, the sentiment hasn't changed since the development of the strategy. There's not enough equal opportunities, and that is affecting people's feedback in terms of promotions and their opportunity to get involved with certain projects. And that's why the other data point about retention is getting better, but then at the same time people are saying there's not enough opportunities. We forget that the CQC also has other draws. We work from home completely compared to other public sector departments. There are certain perks that mean that people do stay on, but then from a talent perspective there is an issue, because if we have an aging workforce, and one of the main reasons is retiring, and we are not attracting and retaining people between 20 to 30 from a strategic workforce planning perspective and to deliver as a regulator, that is a risk for us. There is supposed to be a strategic workforce plan published by the government in the next month, and the regulators are being looked at by the Department for Business and Trade, because I've been speaking to them, because they do want to ensure that regulators are skilled to deliver and for the future. So all the work that we do on talent will have a bigger impact in terms of our strategic workforce planning, and hopefully if we de-bias the system through better business planning and strategic workforce planning, we create the conditions for people to have better experiences in relation to their careers. And also in terms of the bullying points, the experiences about email tone and ignoring, if people are less stressed, then hopefully that helps with the way that we are communicating with each other. Hopefully we're in less meetings, so we can have more opportunities to deliver some messages that might be better delivered by speaking to someone rather than to write it out, because tone is very difficult to tell when you're writing it out. And if you are busy and you write something really, really quickly, it can land a lot harsher than having a conversation and following it up to say, this is what delivered.
I think Bola and then Kay.
Thank you. Thanks, Nadia. Just some reflections. I just really wanted to highlight the progress that we see in the data in relation to colleagues with disabilities and colleagues from our LGBTQ community. I think it's really important that we acknowledge that a lot of the work that is being done is moving us in the right direction. That is not in any way to say it's mission accomplished or that we should be complacent. But I think when we are leading in a very complex system such as we are, it's important to name the progress that we're making. So I just wanted to say that specifically and to say a huge well done to everyone who's working across the organization to get us to that position. And to perhaps reflect on how we might take some of the learning from how we've been able to make that progress in relation to those two populations of staff, to then think about what the data is saying in terms of our ethnic minority colleagues, whether that is in terms of representation at senior levels or indeed what it says in terms of career progression. So in the spirit of building on strength, I do think there is something about perhaps reflecting on how we've made progress in some of those other areas and what we might be able to implement and adapt in relation to ethnic minority colleagues. And the second thing really is to recognize that the answers don't always lie just within us as an organization. The NHS Race and Health Observatory, with whom we work very closely, are leading a piece of work in terms of career progression, for colleagues from ethnic minority backgrounds. And I would suggest that as part of our strategy, we continue to strengthen the collaboration with the RHO, because I think it will get us further forward in relation to this group of colleagues as well.
Thank you, Bola. Over to you, Kay.
Well, so Bola got in sort of with what I was going to say. So I think this conversation has crystallised something I saw in the paper. I think I was most concerned still around the outcomes to do with ethnic minority applicants, colleagues in terms of successful appointments pipeline. What I saw was huge amounts of work going on, a really comprehensive plan, lots of thought, and the conversation has just put more of that thoughtful action there. But it's incredibly difficult to, I think, pinpoint, particularly on that issue, which I think is the one that bothers me most. What are the really, really key actions that need to happen, and how do we get assurance that they are being delivered to time, and I think back to Melanie's point, and that we can keep oversight on that, because it's that slight wood for the trees piece on it, and you've not been, Nadia, in the previous conversations, but you'll get it. There's a lot going on that we need to be tracking and keep, and I think it's really important. And for me, that is one of the most important things in here. I mean, as Paul, you know, touched on, what do we need to focus on? What are the three things, or anyone else?
Either Jackie or Nadia want to come back on that with your top 2 or 3.
It's definitely the learning that we need to do to look at talent and also performance, the objectives when we refresh, because that will get the accountability and the visibility, and then some of the system levers like the business plan, the governance improvements in governance that will help with tracking progress, also the performance objectives that we're looking at. And like when I mentioned the business plan will help with the talent, so one of our interventions is inclusive leadership pathway for ethnic minorities and disabilities. If we don't embed into our processes better talent management, then we can invest in these programs, but after colleagues go through the programs, we are unlikely to retain them or promote them or them to have a very good experience or actually support their career development. So yeah, there's 3 things: talent, learning and performance objectives.
I'd just add as well, I think as well, recruitment. We know that we've got work to do organisationally, because when you look at some of the percentages, we start off with some roles quite positive, and as it goes through each stage, it starts to get reduced. So we know from a recruitment and attraction perspective, we need to think probably more creatively and also track and how we support colleagues who are hiring managers, are looking for a particular role, to think about it quite, you know, specifically, and how we can support that.
Okay, we've got 3 points on this side, which we will come to: Esther, and then Aaron, and then Suze, and then we'll move on.
Thanks, Chair. So thank you, colleagues, for a really interesting report. I think, you know, the systemic kind of action plan around this absolutely support that. And I was just reflecting as I was listening to the conversation and reading this before, around events over the last couple of weeks that have happened internally. We had National Inclusion Week last week that we launched, and I had the opportunity to speak at a couple of the events there. I've been celebrating Psychological Safety Week, and how we can support that kind of safe environment, both physically and psychologically, for our colleagues. And what was really interesting, just to kind of supplement the data in here, was that really open dialogue, that our colleagues joined those calls and felt, I hope, really, and it felt they did, really kind of open and kind of honestly able to share their kind of feelings about how we as a leadership team could support that, but also how they were feeling at the time. And I guess just, you know, my reflection is it's really just kind of warms my heart, I suppose, that we're having this conversation, because it kind of evidences to me that as a board and as an executive team, what a priority that this is, and how, from a values perspective, how important this is to all of us. And I guess from a kind of a moving forward perspective, that open and honest dialogue with our colleagues across the organisation is absolutely one that I know we all support.
Thank you, Esther. Aaron?
Thank you, Chair. Similar to Esther and others here today, I've been on one of those panels around Psychological Safety Week this week. Thank you, Nadia, for organising those and inviting us. I was, like Esther, really struck by the positivity and the momentum from it was about 100 colleagues who joined on that call, and the way that they were really keen to take the rebuilding activity forward, and were coming up with really good ideas about how we can build back better. And they had really strong ideas around performance, appraisal, training, all of which will create that culture which we want in keeping with the CQC way. So really kind of the organisational learning and the ideas that were coming through from our colleagues around those areas will be crucial to delivering on some of the actions we've described. So again, thanks to Nadia for organising those.
Thanks, Aaron. Suze?
Yeah, I just want to add that I think there has been a lot of positive activity as we were on the panel earlier this week, Aaron, and I think that's really great to see. I wanted to sort of draw focus from something that you said, Mel, around what can we do. As the data is great, so the DES report saying that we are recruiting and promoting more disabled colleagues, but I think that the challenge I would put is how are we assuring ourselves that when they are put in post, that we are supporting them with things like reasonable adjustments. So our trade union reps are most frequently busy with having discussions with managers and our members about getting reasonable adjustments put in place, even when there's a workplace passport. So we have the stats around the number of workplace passports, but how are they being used, and is that effective, and are the right things being put in place? Because having a document that says what you need, and then having an inspection planning team not have access to the information to appropriately slot you into an inspection does create barriers, and I think that's where some of the progress needs to happen. It's great we've got the data. I think there's a lot more to do, and like you and Esther said, Aaron, I think we have colleagues who are open. They're giving us the information to improve, and we need to make sure we're listening to them and putting their words into action. Thanks.
Thanks, Suze. Drew.
Thank you so much. I just want to pick up a point that Paula put forward. As co-chair of CQC's LGBT plus network, I'd be very keen to contribute towards any shared learning or good practice opportunities going forward. The network team are very proud of the part that we've played in the progress in this area, recognising that we've still got a long way to go. We're continuing to make efforts around building that psychological safety that we've had discussions around this week, and very valuable discussions around this week, and that trust, the community at CQC, and that kind of equitable representation within and external to the organisation as well. We certainly don't have all the answers, but I'd be really keen and welcome the opportunity alongside our members to do more collaboratively in that space with other networks and with the wider organisation. Thank you.
Thank you, Drew, for that offer from the networks. Any final comments, Jackie, on either 4.1A or B?
No, just to thank colleagues for all the contribution. This is an ongoing dialogue, and we can take certainly the points raised away and working across the organisation really to move things forward. But looking forward to working with executive colleagues on the new structure and what we can do to positively influence that as well. So thanks very much.
Thanks, Jackie. And I think that takes us neatly into paper 4.2. Bola, you're going to lead off on new equality objectives.
Thank you, Chair. So just in terms of the equalities objectives, I just wanted to preface the paper by saying that it's built on two fundamentals, and the first is our CQC way, the vision that we've set out, the purpose that we've outlined, and the commitments both to the public providers and our stakeholders at large. But there is a legal duty, and I've deliberately led with the CQC way because it's more than simply fulfilling a set of legal duties. It's very much what we want to be doing as an organisation. It just so happens that we have a legal basis for doing so. So that was the first thing I wanted to outline to the board. So last year we had 5 objectives, 5 equalities objectives, and we've provided detail of what those were. In the appendix, there is also further detail in terms of the progress that we made across the 5, notably to say in terms of working with others to address health inequalities and using our independent voice were 2 areas where we made particular progress in terms of the equalities objectives. We found it a little bit more challenging in relation to using data for equity for all the reasons that we've already rehearsed in this board, which links to the foundational improvements that we've set out in Julian's opening remarks. So just to give you a précis about where we got to in the previous equalities objectives that we set. Looking forward then to 25-29, we've taken a very strong evidence-based approach. A piece of research was commissioned to look at the role of the regulator in addressing health inequalities. We also launched a self-assessment amongst providers in terms of the progress that they're making, huge consultation and engagement across the organization, including with exec colleagues, but indeed through our staff networks as well. So just to say that a body of evidence and engagement underpins the 4 objectives that we're now putting forward. So the first is voice. That is being retained from before, which is actually how we amplify and enable the voices of people who are most likely to experience inequities in access, experience, and outcomes. The second is data. We propose to continue to retain the use of data to address health inequalities as one of our equalities objectives going forward. As we've talked about through the course of the board meeting today, the importance and the imperative of data to surface the inequalities, but also to help us to track the progress that we're making. The third is to use our core regulatory activities to address inequalities, particularly, for example, we've talked about assessment today, the assessment framework. I've been out on visits myself to some of our GP practices, and I could not emphasize enough the role of the regulator in really surfacing the inequalities that some segments of our society experience. So one of our objectives that we're proposing is to use those core regulatory activities to advance equity. And then the final one, knowing, of course, that it doesn't really matter what objectives we set out in a population-facing way, without having equity, diversity, and inclusion amongst our own workforce, it's unlikely that we will be able to make progress. And so the fourth objective we propose is around inclusive workforce, just building on the point that Jackie and Nadia have just been making there. So I just wanted to set out those proposed four going forward, and to say that in relation to Equalities Objective 1, our proposal is that each directorate will take the leadership in setting out their own objectives that they will deliver against in relation to EO1. And secondly, we are working to identify a set of success measures by which we will tangibly and measurably demonstrate progress in relation to each one of these objectives that we propose, and we'll be having a conversation internally as the executive team in terms of what is a balance of pragmatic, proportionate and meaningful measurements that we may be able to adopt. And just finally is to say that each one of these objectives has an executive sponsor, as we've set out in the paper. We think that's incredibly important to demonstrate leadership and also to galvanize organizational support around these objectives. So I'm just going to leave it there. I really welcome comments and questions, but I'm seeking to give you the rationale and the progress in terms of where we've been and where we're heading. Thank you, Chair.
Well, thank you so much, and I think I would say I warmly welcome the fact that not only have you taken a lead on this with your great experience in the area, but on top of that, it's going to be a shared responsibility at a very senior level to make this happen. So thank you for that. So let's open it up to any comments. Mel.
Really welcome this, and I like the objectives. Very simple, very clear. I did think we could make it much more explicit that this is also a function of the unitary board, because it kind of, I mean, maybe it's just the way I read it, but it almost read that the exec team will do it and then the board will hold that to account. Whereas our objective is to deliver equality, diversity and inclusion. So I know that may be playing on words a little, but I just thought I wanted to make that absolutely explicit, and that we will have an objective as a board to do that. If that's all right, thank you.
Very good point there. Alex.
Thank you, Bola. Excellent paper, and as Mel said, very clear. I just wanted to echo my support for all of them, but especially I think the third one about using our regulatory levers, and we talked about this offline, but you know, making sure within the limit of our powers as we review the single assessment framework and everything that goes with that, that this is kind of writ large against everything we do, and you know, making sure there's checks and balances again within our powers, that you can't be, you know, outstanding for responsive care if you're widening inequalities by maybe, you know, cherry picking all the easy people from affluent areas off your waiting list or whatever that might be. So I really support that, and hopefully we can add that checks and balances, which I know you will.
Just to add to what Bola said, and Mel actually, that we as Chief Inspectors feel that it is absolutely core to our role in sector leadership. Since the last board meeting, the leader report on avoidable deaths for people with a learning disability was published, and once again was very difficult reading. Still twice as many avoidable deaths in the population of people with a learning disability than the general population. That is something that you can't read and pass by. That needs to be absolutely central to what we're doing in terms of regulation and supporting the wider health and social care system addressed. As an example, that would serve to illustrate, I think, the role that each of us as chief inspectors has to follow through our leadership in this area to make sure that we can address those outcomes for people as effectively we can, both in our own work and in our influence of wider work across health and social care. So I wanted to echo that and offer our support as chief inspectors to Bola's work on this.
Tolly.
No, thank you, Chair. And just to follow up from the remark Alex made about EO3 in particular, I mean, it is really stark, isn't it, in certain areas of healthcare. It references black men's mental health, which of course is Aaron's area of expertise, but also, you know, access to testing and treatment, for example, in prostate cancer, and maternal mortality. I think the figures are so stark. The risk of dying being 3 times greater is just, it could not be more stark, really. So the opportunity as a regulator to be able to assess this within providers, I think, is key, and I think articulating as you have done is so helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Tolly. Chris.
Just wanted to draw the link between EO1 and now commitments that Julian talked about earlier. There's a really strong and important link for me in terms of continuing to rebuild trust with people who use services, that we are able to amplify their voice well, and it speaks exactly to the commitments that we set out for the public as we launch our thinking around our values and behaviour. So I just wanted to say this is, for me, an example of doing what we said we would do with regards to our commitments to people who use services.
Thanks, Chris. On to Esther.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Bola. It would be remiss of me not to talk about EO2 and the kind of red or limited progress we've made so far in our use of data to understand our equality risks. So I just wanted to share that absolutely this will be part of our roadmap going forwards, and a systematic approach to this we are already strengthening rather than the piecemeal one perhaps we've been working with until now. So we've put in place some additional support from a governance perspective around how we manage and utilise our data and how we can improve our provision in that respect to support us improving in that area. Thanks.
Thanks, Esther. Drew. And then Aaron.
Thank you. Fully support the proposed objectives and how, as Melanie suggested, how clear they are. Very helpful paper. Particularly welcome EO1, amplifying voices. Having spent many days over the last few months at events with the LGBT community particularly, we've heard very much firsthand how so often the very basics, the fundamentals of care are missing for LGBT plus people that otherwise we would be taking action on in more normative environments. Again, please consider utilising our connections, our lived experience and expertise to reach out to communities that we don't always do well enough to contact. Utilise us in our roads in when we go about these activities. Thank you.
Thanks, Drew. Aaron?
Thank you, Chair. Tolly mentioned the work that we're doing around black men's mental health. And in response to Alex's observation on EO3, I wanted to just talk about a specific piece of work that we're doing. Our inspectors within the Mental Health Inspectorate and our Mental Health Act reviewers will be actively working with providers about their implementation of the Patient and Carer Race Equality Framework in their inspection and Mental Health Act review activity, and really supporting improvements where they see it, highlighting areas of good practice to correct one of the injustices which has driven the Mental Health Act or the Mental Health Bill that's working its way through Parliament. So we're really determined to use our regulatory levers to correct those injustices where we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. Really important. I don't see any other hands at the moment, so on that note, I think we can probably move on, but a really important discussion, and I hope everybody's heard the level of commitment to this around the table. Bola, back to you.
Just for the purposes of the minutes, Chair, can we take as read that the objectives are therefore approved by the board?
Sorry, that's a really important point. Can we take them as approved? Yes, we can.
Thank you, Chair.
So I think that takes us on to the business plan. Chris Usher.
Thanks, Chair. So this is our business plan for 25-26. Colleagues may remember we had the measures that we planned to use in our June public board. This is now a chance to see the full business plan, including narrative. We've pitched this as a bridging plan for this year, recognising the need to lay foundations for the future. And we've split it into two parts. Part one focuses on the immediate actions that we've agreed we need to focus on, and the foundational improvements that we need to build on. Part two includes our wider work and regulatory commitments we have. It's intentionally targeted that way, recognising that what we call the 4+5 are our core focus right now. Plan sets about how we'll go about our business, our commitments to public providers, our people, partners, as well as the values we'll uphold. And we've included a set of measures that have been developed with acknowledgement of where we are in our journey. It helps provide a basis to demonstrate our improvements, but hopefully show visible progress as we go through the year. So that's all I was planning to say in a way of an opening, Chair.
That's fine. Put it open to discussion. Julian, is there anything you'd like to add?
Thank you, Mike, and thanks, Chris. I think just to say this is obviously important in the context of giving some quantifiable, clear indicators of what we're aiming to achieve, both on the 4 immediate priorities we've been focusing on, but also signalling the importance of the work on the foundational improvements and indeed the wider activity. I know that there'll be colleagues in providers who might want us to be doing to be going further faster on some of the metrics, and indeed there'll be some colleagues who will feel anxious about what we're committing to. So there'll mixed perspectives on this, but I think the important thing is that we've been very thoughtful about this. We've engaged a lot with our provider colleagues and within the organisation about how we approach this, about how we ensure that we are accountable as a regulator in terms of the clarity of delivery against this. And a number of colleagues and organisations that I've spent time with during the first few months of in this role have been urging us to be clear about what we're aiming to do by when, quantifying our goals, being clear about the metrics we're going to hold ourselves to. So I think it's important actually that we've got this, and it's important that we are setting out for the rest of the year where we aim to be. And I would also say we've had important conversations with colleagues in DHSC about this work and making sure that we're setting ourselves up in the right way to tackle this. And this does represent that sort of incremental but positive and important return to better performance, but it is the start, not the end. And I think it's just to emphasise that in terms of managing expectations, but it sets us on the right path, I believe, to getting to a better position in terms of our overall performance. So thank you.
Thanks, Julian. Any other points that people want to raise on the business plan? David.
Just a very quick question, which is, are we going to review it subsequently through the year? What is the process going to be, Chris, to look at the business plan and see if there are changes that could be beneficially made to it?
Yes, I think we're in the odd position that we're halfway through the year and agreeing a plan, so we're already a bit out of sync. I think our focus needs to be on measuring our performance for the rest of the year and thinking about how do we set a plan in the coming year and how we measure ourselves against that. So I think it's a constant evolution, but also recognising the oddness that we are midway through the year and setting the plan.
And just to say, we're coming on to performance, finance and risk assurance a little bit later in the agenda.
The question really is, will there be any form of formal review that the board will see of this plan, or are you saying that no, that won't be the case, there'll just be performance measures and really we're moving to the next year?
Effectively, that's what I'm, yeah.
Brilliant.
I sense, David, I just wanted to kind of amplify Chris's response and on that. I think it's been a judgment, and I think it's been a very important one that we have prioritised quite sort of clearly the things that we know we need to focus on, and the business plan is built around those. We will be tracking performance against those, absolutely, and I think through the routine performance monitoring and indeed what comes back to the board. But in the usual way, we'll be reviewing how we're doing against these to inform next year's plan, to make sure that, I think in terms of your question, that we take the necessary learning and understanding as we work through all of the things we're aiming to achieve, to make sure that when we're setting next year's plan, we're pushing ourselves where we need to, we're being realistic about maybe what we haven't done as much of, because frankly, given where the CQC has been, you know, we've got to be judicious about how many things we take on and how we deliver on those commitments that we're making.
Any other points on the business plan? Because if not, I think we do have to approve this one. So does it have approval? It does. I'm seeing that. The good news is that having done that, we have got a quick break. I suggest we start again at 3 o'clock.
I think this report into independent care, education and treatment reviews is logically placed on the agenda after our discussion on the quality objectives, and particularly the need for us to be active participants in addressing inequalities for people. In this instance, clearly it relates to people's long-term seclusion for people with learning disability and autism, very much in response to Baroness Hollins's report in 2023, which was called My Heart Breaks. I think, and Rebecca will take us through this, will illustrate the work that we've done to really actively and practically try and help people and reduce the really profoundly damaging effect that long-term seclusion can have on people. I would also stress that the work that we've done on this, that I will sponsor from now on, do in close collaboration with Aaron, which hopefully again serves to illustrate the importance of cross-sector working in our new structure. But I'm really pleased that Rebecca's here with her leadership to present on progress to date and next steps. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Chris, and welcome, Rebecca. Over to you.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Chris, for the introduction. So thank you, everyone, for giving me the opportunity to update today on the Independent Care and Education Treatment Review programme that we've been running for the last 15 months, and it's a 2-year programme. As Chris has already said, the context of this is following Baroness Hollins's report, My Heart Breaks, that was published in November 2023, and we were asked as part of that to run the programme for 2 years. When we're talking about long-term segregation, we're talking about 48 hours. Where people have been detained and segregated, and that's people with learning disability and autistic people. So we launched the actual programme following the recruitment of chairs in May 2024. We had a phased rollout of panels, and we worked collaboratively with NHS England and the regional teams, which was really important to really understand who was waiting for an independent care and education treatment review. And who we needed to make sure that we could review basically the safety and care of those people to support them to move out of long-term segregation. That is the aim and purpose of an independent review by independent chairs. So from to date, we've actually carried out 71 ICTRs, and we have managed to support 19 people to leave long-term segregation into their own homes, or off of long-term segregation onto a ward. This is quite significant. And in terms of the number of people now in LT at long-term segregation, it's 74. Previously it was 95 and it was also in the hundreds. So we've had a significant impact on this work programme to really support people to move out of long-term segregation. So early indicators of impact really, you know, we've had really positive feedback from people themselves. We've had really positive feedback from the chairs, from supporters of those in long-term segregation about our approach. So in terms of, you know, we continue to seek feedback from people throughout the process, right at the beginning and 3 to 6 months down the line, to see actually what differences this made. In terms of oversight and governance, we have an external oversight panel that's run by 2 independent chairs. That's Oliver Shanley and Clinton Farquharson. And that panel, oversight panel, scrutinises the reports that we are producing following the reviews for people that have been in long-term segregation, pulling out the themes and trends, but the impact of our review, but also how are people's quality of life being experienced and benefits from it. That group meets quarterly, and actually the feedback from that group is going to be really important in terms of our national reporting. So they've already informed part of our state of care reporting. They will inform the mental health report, annual report that we produce, but also our independent voice piece that we will be producing in the spring and summer of next year. In terms of improvements for people, what we've found is important, and the review process itself, is that we've enabled communication to be better for people that are going through the review process. They've had access also to activities that are important to them, but also it's about the person-centeredness and personalisation of approach. In terms of influence and impact, I mean, I think for us, what we're finding, we're really trying to find out actually we need to prevent long-term segregation. And for us, it's about looking at what practice is going on in other parts of the country. So, for example, there are some organisations that refuse to use long-term segregation. We want to shine a light on that. And so our reports will reflect that going forward. And also our feedback from our external oversight panel will be able to capture some of that information and will inform our reporting. In terms of key themes, you know, you'll see from the paper, we've focused on discharge planning and how important the planning stage is, also the importance of collaboration across the health and social care sectors in terms of commissioners, and also just the right support at the right time for people to move on. In terms of next steps for this programme, we're waiting for confirmation from the Treasury around further funding. We will continue this work programme until March 2026, and as I said, we'll be reporting publicly on this in the spring and summer. We will continue to engage with stakeholders in terms of NHS England, but also our providers on the ground to work with them, and we will also be aiming to recruit more Mental Health Act chairs if we get further funding. At this point, I'm going to hand over to Aaron, so thank you.
Aaron.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Rebecca. Thanks, Chris. I just wanted to say how fantastic this work has been and how brilliant it's been to see the results that the team have achieved, and thanks to the teams that have been involved in this. For those 19 individuals, their families, carers, supporters, for them to move from segregation to being in a communal setting with other people, whether that's in a healthcare setting with other people or whether in their home, that's transformative, and it's about human rights. So it's fantastic that we're doing that work. Beyond the numbers, I also wanted to make the point about the anticipatory effect that regulation has and that this has in helping providers and others think about not even going down the path of segregation, because actually when you know that there's going to be oversight, it does help to make people think of other options. So I just wanted to highlight the anticipatory effect of the work that's been done beyond the numbers that Rebecca has presented. So thank you.
Really important point. Thanks for that, Aaron. And I have to say, I found the tables here really and graphs really very helpful, and the fact that 14 of those people have been in segregation for 5 or more years. Just the thought of that is pretty awful. So anything we can do to what maybe I can ask a question, which is, what is it about us doing these reviews that enables people to be moved from segregation to other settings?
So I think the difference with our ICTR programme is that we are able to set out a clear plan of action following the review that needs to be acted on and followed up. We also follow up. So we follow up with the person after the review to ask them and their supporters, advocates, to see, you know, what did it feel like for them, what difference is it making. But we also follow up 3 to 6 months later to really see, actually, has this happened? And I think that that is the impact of us as a regulator leading this programme and carrying out the reviews themselves. And as Aaron has said, you know, in terms of those anticipatory levers, as a regulator, you know, people know that we are looking and we are scrutinising and we really want to make a difference to people's lives. This is having an impact. So some people that where we had set up a review for them, actually they also left long-term segregation as a result of that. So I think, and this all really lends itself to thinking about market shaping, as I've said, thinking about the 10-year plan, thinking about the CQC review, the importance of social care provision at the right time for people. So I think that we've done well so far, we really have, and I think we want to keep going with this because it is making a difference for people.
Thanks very much indeed. But clearly this is one of the programmes that is funded out of grant in aid, so we have to await decisions on that. But certainly I would be very supportive, and I get the impression that the board would be very supportive of that as well. Any other comments on this really important work? Yes, Mel, certainly.
Yes, of course I would want to speak on this item. So firstly, Chris and Rebecca, thank you so much for taking me through the report in some more detail. I really appreciated that. So I just want to highlight this and just remind everybody of Chris's comment earlier about the leader report. So we know that people with autism and learning disability are detained. It actually causes premature death for this group of people. And long-term segregation has such a significant and detrimental and often long-term impact on somebody's health and their well-being. So this intervention has been so important, so thank you for highlighting that work, Rebecca. And certainly from being on the other side and knowing some of the individuals that have been through that process, what regulation brings is some accountability and oversight, as Aaron said, so it makes people think about what they're doing rather than just slipping into that responsive, because it's difficult working in these settings, you get into a responsive mode, but then there's some visibility. So often the chairs are the people that are having some visibility and bringing people together and ensuring equality of voice. So so there is that, the professionals around the person, the carer, the family, and the person themselves have some voice in that circumstance. So it's really important work. So I really hope that we get that support from Treasury. But thank you for the report.
Paula.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Deborah. Really good to see you. Just to emphasise that actually picking up the conversation we had earlier on around the equalities objectives, I think this is a key example of how our regulatory activities can actually change the climate. And I think the change in behaviour that you've just been talking about and how this programme of work has driven that buttresses the point that our core regulatory functions can have, incredibly powerful impact in terms of how the system behaves and how it treats those who are seldom heard or for other reasons on the peripheries of society. So just to say a real well done to everyone involved, and hoping that this is supported to continue. Thank you.
Sorry, Richard. Yes.
Thank you. Really fascinating report, and the results obviously massive for those individuals affected. I'm wondering about the learning, and I take Aaron's points and your own, Rebecca, about the kind of anticipatory impact now that people will be much more careful about their decision making. But in looking at the point at which a decision is made, I don't expect you to answer this now, but are there any trends or typical situations that make that more likely? And I'm wondering about things like out of hours, weekends, times when the people who are making decisions aren't maybe fully staffed with the right experience and capabilities. So once people then step into this this setting, it's very hard to then get out again. And so I don't expect you to answer that now, but if there is any learning about that, I suspect, I may not be right, but I suspect that might contribute to it. And there's some supply side factors that really need to be addressed, and it isn't a demand issue, it's a supply issue that could be triggering inappropriate decisions, basically. But any learning on that, and it'd be really good to export that to people who are in that setting, so that we can actually target some of the things that lead to this risk being higher in that place as opposed to that place.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. I think that the analysis that we're doing in terms of the data we're collecting, but also the feedback from people, clinicians, chairs, commissioners, will enable us to understand the themes and trends for that, absolutely. And we will be wanting to report on that. And I think, you know, provision being available at the right time for people is very much about the agenda of reducing admission into hospital in the first place. So it's a whole preventative agenda that we want to be influencing and informing. So yeah, hopefully we will have some key themes and trends, I think, in terms of informing the learning and thinking about the culture and mindset and changing commissioning practice, thinking about a human rights-based approach to commissioning would be, you know, the way that we would like things to move forward. But, you know, it's early days, and I think, you know, collecting that information will be critical to that. So thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. So I think this has got a lot of support, and unless there are any other final comments, it'll be many thanks to you, Rebecca, in particular for the work on this, but also the support from executive directors and chief inspectors. Thank you. We now move on to the People Assurance Report. I think there is a slight error in the covering paper, where it says that 79.7% of candidates come from LGBT community. I think that wasn't actually the correct way round. It's 79.7 are recorded as heterosexual and 8.4% LGBT. Drew, I think you would probably have noted that yourself. With that in mind, Jackie, over to you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, if only my job would be done, wouldn't it? So, yeah. So this is the first of the new format of the People Data Pack, following feedback around content and presentation. You see some areas are showing some positive movement. Some, you know, as you would expect, there's work to be done. We've touched on some of it in the previous agenda item. Before we get into sort of the data and also what next, I think it's also worth just recognising that what it doesn't do is bring to life the concerted and focused effort across the whole organisation and the commitment in terms of the work on our priorities and integration, and where that fits into recruitment, managers supporting interviews, supporting their staff, thinking about the conversations that have taken place with colleagues around how we execute the integration. And I think there's a direct correlation around how that has been addressed and some of the data in here. I don't intend on going through it line by line, but obviously we can have conversations about anything specific. I think going forward, what we need to do is carry out some of the work that's already started. So we'll have 2 reporting systems, ESR and Signum. So we're looking at how we bring them together so the data gives more accuracy. Thinking about sector-specific and directorate-specific data so we can see trends, patterns and focus any support to managers and leaders in terms of any interventions or guidance. I think the other thing is we need to look at how we benchmark across other organisations and how we ensure that we have consistent and timely conversations around emerging patterns, what the data is telling us. So looking at how we collate the data and our people hub, thinking about how we can make the data more readily available, timely, and working with data colleagues as well on how we might do that. So I think that's all I wanted to say around where we are with the pack now, plans that create greater support and insight for leaders and managers, and how really it will emerge, and any feedback more than welcome that would help these conversations and also conversations in the organisation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jackie. I think we can open this to discussion. Kay, can you pop your thing on?
Yeah, reflecting, it's a really, really helpful report, and I'm absolutely one for keeping it short and focused, and the metrics, seeing the trend reports. I suppose in the last conversation, Nadia talked, and it's come up a couple of times, the importance of performance and performance objectives, and it was just whether how changes planned in that area will be reflected here. I think we all know that those conversations are really, really important in terms of driving a lot of the right behaviours. So just in a future report, it might be helpful to come back to that. And also because we are bound to, as all organisations are, be looking at productivity, and it all sort of goes hand in glove, really.
So I can come back on that. So we're looking at working with our performance colleagues on our objectives, appraisals and performance conversations, but much wider than that in terms of what does a good conversation look like, what are the organisational objectives going to be that maybe apply to everybody, what are the sector specific objectives. So like I say, the two go hand in hand, the performance and objectives and appraisal system. So hoping to get a proposal together by the end of September, start of October, specifically looking at that.
Other comments on this? Suze.
Thank you. I think it's really good to see the required learning on here, and I think as a union side we would like to see the breakdown of mandatory training for managers, especially around some of the modules that are targeted around some of the cultural things, so the anti-racism. I understand that I will sit here and say that I have a week left to do my anti-racism training, so I'm part of the red statistics on this slide, but those figures are quite low. I think we're conscious of that. People in leadership positions have more influence, and therefore if we're not getting the response rates from managers who are very busy, we want to acknowledge that managers are our union members as well, and we'd like to highlight that everyone has a lot on at the minute, but how do we empower people to take that training and ensure that the people with the most influence are given the tools to get on board with the cultural change we are all looking to see. Thanks.
Esther.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Jackie. I just wanted to comment on our use of the kind of acronym LGB+, and I just don't want to be not inclusive of our colleagues who identify as trans, or as of our colleagues who do not meet the LDG or the B criteria, recognising the intersectionality, and colleagues may not feel like they fit into one of those groups. So I just wanted to specifically say that I don't think there's any intention about not being inclusive, but there may well be colleagues watching this or reading this that may well react to that, so I thought it's important to share.
I think that's an important point. Thanks for raising it, Esther. Drew.
Thank you, Des, for picking up on a point that I was going to mention, that separation between gender and sexuality in this case doesn't feel wholly effective or beneficial. I do wonder whether we can look into what a KPI target might look like for that workforce representation in senior leadership for LGBTQIA+ people. If there's not a comparative labour market data, is there other routes that we can explore? Again, happy to work with you on that. Wonderful. Yeah, thank you so much.
Any other points on this? I don't see any, so thank you very much indeed. I think that takes us on to freedom to speak up.
It does indeed, and I think we are welcoming Amanda.
Do we need to...
Jackie is... Great. Amanda, welcome. Do you want to take the hot seat, as it were? Colleagues, board members, I wanted to introduce this item. This is an important item, and I'm very grateful to Amanda joining us. Amanda Oates, Amanda, I'm sure, do you want to just introduce yourself in terms of your background?
Hi, my name is Amanda Rhodes, and I've formerly been a Chief People Officer for the NHS and Deputy Chief Exec, and I'm also recently appointed as a Non-Executive Director as well.
Thank you very much.
Running my own company.
Thank you. And the reason we asked, Amanda's done a lot of work over the course of her career on establishing and leading and creating in health care organisations fair and just cultures, and given the challenge we face as CQC, particularly with our Freedom to Speak Up process, we felt it was important on the back of a number of issues and reports about shortcomings in our approach to commission Amanda to do a review of our Freedom to Speak Up arrangements with a view to seeing how we can support and strengthen those. Now this follows, I think, a difficult period for CQC, as is, I think, very clear to everyone, but experienced quite profoundly by colleagues within the organisation in terms of their experience of attempting to speak up and finding that problematic, or feeling it's at a sort of senior leadership level hasn't been recognised. What I did want to do is draw a distinction between the response that some people have met and our excellent Freedom to Speak Up colleagues, because we are fortunate to have some excellent colleagues in the organisation who've acted as Freedom to Speak Up champions and have continued to do so. And if I can just put on record my thanks to Carolyn Jenkinson, who many of you will know has acted tirelessly as our Freedom to Speak Up champion with the support of other colleagues. But it's been tough for her and indeed the other guardians. And I think particularly the work that we've done developing and co-creating CQC Way, we've seen a lot in there about the problems with Freedom to Speak Up. And so in order to really eyeball that, to tackle that, to think about how we support our Freedom to Speak Up guardians and the work that they do, and indeed how we sort of deepen, strengthen the sense of psychological safety across the organisation, we asked Amanda to come in and lead that work. We've done a lot of focus groups, networks, and I'm grateful, Amanda, for you having done all of that. I also wanted to say, because both Suze and Drew will know how important this work is and how much this has been a conversation that we've had about the need for us to address this on the back of a lot of difficult issues in the past. I'm pleased to say I now meet frequently with Carolyn and the other guardians. It's invaluable in terms of what they offer. I'm also pleased that, just to reinforce the point that you made earlier, Mike, that we've now got Ruth as our non-executive Freedom to Speak Up champion. I want to thank Chris Zakiti for having been in place as our exec lead, who's handing the torch on to Aaron as our exec sponsor for Freedom to Speak Up. So we want to make sure we're giving it the proper level of attention, seriousness at board level, both non-exec, exec, and I have a personal commitment and interest in making sure we get this right. So a lot for us to do, but I think very important that as a board we're listening to what Amanda's got to say in terms of the recommendations she's setting out, we're being asked to consider those and think about those in terms of how we take it forward. But I think it's an important moment, I guess, for us, given everything that has happened in the organisation, that we're talking about this and being very open and public about it. So with that introduction, Amanda, I'll hand to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you, colleagues, for receiving this report. And a wider thank you to all the colleagues who I've engaged with, who've done so with total honesty and transparency and vulnerability as well. They've really leaned into this work. So as an external advisor, I'm fully aware of the challenges that CQC have been facing around freedom to speak up, but I also see tremendous potential in the organisation to get this right going forward. I've drawn on analysis both qualitative and quantitative, which has given insight to where the CQC is now and where it's aspiring to go. And whilst the report and recommendations do highlight gaps, I've witnessed strong willingness to engage and seek resolution from all the parties to drive the change that is necessary. The review is an integral part of CQC's overall transformation programme. I know the board are sensitive to the fatigue that exists within the organisation, to colleagues' feedback about normalising inappropriate behaviours, and actually the different experiences from those colleagues with protected characteristics, and the historical harm that has occurred. I know you're aware of that. But we can't underestimate the support that is needed for leaders and colleagues to lean into the CQC way and speak up culture, to live the values of the organisation even when no one is watching, because that's the true test. There are 9 recommendations which really represent a roadmap to enact and lead cultural change. And the key for me is the enactment, is the monitoring, is the ongoing evaluation against the outcomes that you describe and agree on. There's 3 overarching pillars, the first one being policy, systems and feedback. And really simply, that's about having clear processes and very, very clear timelines enabled through digital tracking, so you can monitor and report. And that's not just for board to have assurance that the interventions that are being put in place are working, but it's also for staff as well, so staff know when they raise concerns that the interventions are actually leading to improvement, because that leads to a more positive speak-up culture. So really being clear about closing those feedback loops, which is what I've heard as a gap from colleagues that I've spoke to. Leadership culture, so it's great to hear those appointments for both exec and non-executive director colleagues, and I think that will be really well received within the organisation. There's a component about safety training, psychological safety training and just culture training, and we're starting some of that this week within the organisation, and particular support for those colleagues who have got a protected characteristic. And then there's some structural support that's being recommended for network chairs, for people processes and for guardian capacity. So I know in the report it says hopefully a lead guardian will be out for appointment in September. I know they're just going out for final, final ratification of that, so it's probably going to be in October. The next steps are covered on page 9, but if I can just pull out a couple of those next steps. I think really, really critically is for the board and the People Committee to agree the key metrics that are required both for freedom to speak up and for people processes, to make sure there's transparent reporting and monitoring against them and adherence to policy timescales, but also adherence to understand what interventions have worked and what need further escalation or intervention to ensure that loop is closed down. And so real clarity on any outstanding cases that exist within the organisation currently and have been outstanding for a period of time. We have clear communicated dates when they will be completed, because I think that's a real message to the organisation that it's taking this approach really, really seriously. I absolutely firmly believe with the people around this table and the people I've spoken to that the CQC can drive a change for freedom to speak up, enabled through the CQC way, with full board commitment. The true test is that every member of staff feels able to raise a concern, and when they do so, they feel listened to without having a defensive response. So it's really important that leaders lean in and be curious when somebody speaks up, to really start encouraging line managers to be the owner and be that first contact point to deal with simpler issues as and when they arise. the ability for the speak-up culture to tell the boss bad news. That's the true test. But equally, for colleagues to be able to give feedback and that to be listened to without fear of being gaslit or blamed. So I'm really pleased to present this report and happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Amanda, thank you so much for that. That's really clear. Do you want to say more at this point, Julian?
I'll just very briefly, because I know Suze is poised to speak, but I did want to just really underline that point Amanda's just made. This is for all of us. It's impossible for our freedom to speak up guardians, however good they are, to do this for the organisation. It requires everyone to be a part of this, and we need to support them in the way that you described. And I think that this is a kind of cornerstone of how we improve and change the experience that staff have had previously in the organisation. Thank you.
Suze.
Thanks very much. Of course, this is one that I was going to jump in on. So first off, I want to say thank you, Amanda, for engaging so wonderfully with the trade union. It has been nice to be listened to, as often we are the stopgap when speaking up doesn't go well, and that we become the independent voice or the place of psychological safety for our colleagues and our members. I think it's a great report and some great recommendations, but unfortunately it doesn't come as any surprise what you've written to myself and Dee as union leads. And there's just a few things that I think I guess stuck out. Is I believe that your recommendations around empowering our guardians is key. I was quite shocked, as I naively thought that guardians got protected time, and turns out that they don't, and that I think our freedom to speak up process was previously run on goodwill, which isn't sustainable, and the cost of that is on the individual often to juggle humans, which never feels like the right kind of juggling. And there's a few things in your report, as we discussed earlier this week, that I just wanted to sort of draw the attention of the board. Firstly, I think the accountability for the CQC way is key. I think it harks back to the psychological safety panel discussion with Aaron around having that curiosity and that lack of defensiveness, and how do we empower our leaders to curiously hear how their words have landed, and rather than focusing solely on the intent, because I think that's where further damage is caused of speaking up and not feeling listened to. There was an element around the completed actions and making sure that the board has sight of when an action is completed, or the activity around a speak up item is completed. And I just want to sort of mention that I think it's key, similar to the previous comments, that this isn't a tick box exercise, and that we ensure that the individual is looped in and that they feel that the action was appropriate and that they have been listened to, and that we reflect where there's ever any learning that that person doesn't feel the action has completed their speaking up. A lot of people do want to be heard, but they also want to see some action in the organisation. And the last thing I'll say is that there is a phrase in this report, which I've talked to Amanda already, as the phrase "you said we did," and I would implore us not to use that. It is a phrase or a buzzword that was used. I have been in the organisation for quite a while, and I looked back in my mailbox, and there was a "you said we did" response email from 2016 off the back of some staff survey results, and as we will all acknowledge, there's often not a lot of movement in the positive metrics in our staff survey results, and so I think that this one carries some legacy. And at the minute, in reflection of our current/previous climate, that might be perceived as you haven't understood what we've done, and so it pushes it back to the individual to say, we've done something, you just can't see it, or you don't understand that. So I think we need to change the rhetoric around this and really make it that inclusive, person-centred approach, as there's valuable learning from this, and it has massive cultural impacts. Thank you.
Thank you, Suze. Other comments around the table? You will have observed that there are no fewer than 9 recommendations. Now, technically, this paper is down as for discussion, but I suppose the question is, are there any or all of those that we could approve? Julian, I don't know, I've only just sprung that on you, recognising that this is a discussion paper, not an approval paper, but Suze.
There was one thing I forgot to add, and that was just to note that while I think the technology solution is what is needed, and that tracking and that oversight and that I'm all about transparency, I just want to acknowledge that in amongst everything we're trying to do in a tech space, that we should be carefully considering where that sits in priority. It obviously will add value, but our tech roadmap is already very busy, and I just think we are trying to do a lot, and we have to be mindful about where that fits in and doing the right thing. So maybe we could do something internally as an interim, but for not to be the reason it's dismissed, because I do think that will add a lot of value. Thanks.
Richard. So I'm getting a bit out of sync here. It's really a question back to Amanda, or question / point. In my experience of this, when we get things working really well, the number of footsuits goes up, and that would be a good thing. But then at some future date, you want them to go down because people feel that they don't need to use that route. They could use line management, team briefing, meetings, whatever else to be heard. I just think, Amanda, for us as board, we should have an idea of a sort of trajectory that we need to look at. And with your advice, hopefully, you can say, well, it would look good if it went up like that, but if it still keeps going up in 2 years' time, we haven't got this right, have we? So when should we start seeing something reduce? So I guess just for us, in terms of monitoring this going forward, what sort of profile ought we to be looking at?
Yeah, I think that's a really good reflection, Richard. And I think absolutely, higher level of reporting is a good indication, but I suppose a lower level of impact in terms of harm or hurt for colleagues that are raising concerns. And a really good indicator would be a reduction of the Julian, what's going direct to Julian in the inbox. So if it could go direct to the line managers, or indeed the freedom to speak up guardians. But you notice in the report one of the recommendations about establishing a triage group or a sort of coordination group, because I think that's really important, because what I've noticed is sometimes freedom to speak up concerns, the freedom to speak up guardians don't know, and neither do HR. It might sit with the line manager, and both sides of that coin could be getting unfairly sort of finger pointing to say, well, I've raised this concern and nothing's happened. But if they don't actually know, and I have had experience when I spoke at some of the focus groups of that learning and insight, so I think the triage group will be really, really helpful in coordinating to make sure the organisation is fully aware what freedom to speak up concerns are out there and exist currently.
Esther.
Thanks, Amanda. And Susie took the words out of my mouth. I'm very supportive of your recommendations, Amanda, but just conscious of the need to build that in at the right time from a kind of a digital roadmap perspective with regards to that recommendation. And then just a comment relating to recommendation 7, but also I think some of your opening comments, and that's around the time we allow our colleagues working in this space to really focus on these roles, and that feels really, really important. And I guess what I don't know is whether, for example, our network chairs have allotted or allocated time to do those roles in addition to kind of the freedom to speak up guardian roles. And so just from previous experience when in other organisations, when we try to do this and not give colleagues that allocated time, it is really, really challenging. It doesn't really kind of lend itself to our focus and our priority in this area. So would really support kind of the appropriate amount of time that colleagues need to do these roles properly.
And I fully support that, and I'd actually say that's one of the strengths of the organisation. You do give colleagues support for network chair roles, but I suppose what this was alluding to is that I think sometimes unfairly colleagues have been leaned into or brought into things that are beyond their ability or their resource in that chair role to support. And actually it may be better to have strong partnerships, with disability networks nationally, the NHS Race Observatory, to be able to pull in expertise when it can add value, because not all of that resource may be needed full-time internally within the organisation, but you need to have those contact points so you can pull it in at the appropriate times. So
I hear a lot of support in general for this. I think rather than trying to approve every one of the 9 recommendations, we might ask you, Julian, to take this away and come back, because some of them may take more time. I mean, we've got, one of them was about developing a dedicated IT system, and I know Esther's got quite a lot on her plate, so exactly what the timescale for that would be, I think maybe ET could review this. I think there's huge support for the principles here, and actually for all 9 probably, but let's get a timeline on it, and really, rather than just waving it through.
I was going to say, Mike, I think that we want to make sure we do this right. We want to make sure that we are delivering against both the sort of spirit and the substance of the recommendations. I think what would be helpful would be, I think the mood of the board is very clear about supporting this, and what I'd be keen for us to do is perhaps take your recommendations, Amanda, turn those into a clear sort of plan around how we deliver it with key timelines and so on, and making sure we're aligning the right resources to get that right. We'll be engaging with you, Suze, and trade union colleagues, and obviously Drew with staff networks on this. The fact that we're talking about this in public board, I think, is a good start as far as opening this up and owning the problems we've had and got, and how we improve that. So I think, Mike, if we bring back that plan once we've looked at the detail of that, taking into account the other challenges, particularly that point around IT, but there are some things we can do, and indeed there's some things we've already done in here. So I think that doesn't stop us making rapid progress. But can I just thank you, Amanda, for, I know this has been a lot of work, and I know you've put a lot into engaging with colleagues across the whole organisation, and equally I know there'll be a lot of colleagues watching this board meeting who have felt we needed to really think about how we seriously address this and act on this, and I hope that colleagues feel confident and assured that we're clear. We need to take significant steps to strengthen and improve, and just to say once again a big thank you to our Freedom to Speak Up Guardians who've been central to this, and I'm looking forward to working with them as we take this forward. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Right. Very good. So next we go on to performance, finance and risk assurance updates. And I think, Chris Usher, that is you.
Yeah, so no sooner did we sign off the business plan than we're reporting on it. So lovely segue. So I'll pull out some key bits on performance, say a bit on risk, and then a bit of finance, and then open it out for others to come in on. So with regards to, so this is our pack for Q1 plus a bit of July, because board didn't meet in August, so we've added in July just for context. So with assessments, our target, as you will know, is 9,000 assessments by September 26. We've completed just short of 2,000 to date, which is above target. Some areas are showing signs of this be more of a challenge in, for example, mental health, which Aaron may want to touch on. Other areas are kind of ahead of target, but it's generally is an area that we just need to maintain progress on. There's a long journey through to September 26, and acutely aware that colleagues will experience change as they move into the sector alignment. So we can't rest on our laurels in terms of assessment numbers. So that's something we're closely tracking. In terms of registration, the overall volume of registration is reducing, as is those over 10 weeks old. We aim to reduce or clear those over 10 weeks old. So you can see that the status for the volume and percentage of over 10 weeks old is red, and it will be until we've cleared that. We've looked at interventions, specifically around domiciliary care agency registrations, and doing rapid improvement work, given there's high volumes involved in there. So hopefully that's one of the things that's helping see the reduction, and will continue. We are tracking, though, the percentage over 10 weeks old as a proportion of overall volume, and that remains out of kilter, so that remains red. Information of concern, so all areas are below target. There's a lot of work gone in by colleagues aiming to clear backlogs we've had in place, that we've been tracking for some time. That's taken a lot of effort. So those backlogs have cleared through, and we're starting to see improvements now, but I think this is one that's going to take a concerted effort to focus on our performance, and it's also one where colleagues are facing competing priorities in terms of delivery assessment. So it is improving in areas, but it's one that we continue to monitor closely. Other bits just to pull out in some positive sentiment would be NTSA call lines. Really strong performance as seen in the call lines we've got in our call centre. Targets MNSI, contact and trust and families, and you see strong performance there, and also progress against our local authority assessment journey as well. In terms of risk, so we're just in the process of reviewing our approach to risk, including new policy framework, and we've also recently introduced a new subcommittee of our executive team to really focus in on risk and how we manage and mitigate our risks that we have. The four highest scoring risks, just to pull out from our register, would be around a productivity and number of assessments, as I've just touched on, the 9,000 target being a key focus for us. So we need to manage any risks associated with that. Staff wellbeing and morale, we've touched on already in this conversation, kind of progress or trends in our EDI survey, but it also shows, and other elements of this conversation have pulled out, there's a lot more work we need to do around wellbeing and morale. Structures and leadership, so we've got the alignment of operations about to take place, but what we've talked about in our risk committee was about splitting this risk out, one around structures, which will hopefully mitigate shortly, but then really the risk here remains with our the kind of quality of our leadership and the work we need to do to ensure that we've got effective leadership in place throughout the organisation. And finally, meeting stakeholder expectations, engaging stakeholders in change and actively seeking feedback is something we're working on, and there'll be more evaluation of sentiment in November coming through. And then finally, just in terms of our money, at the end of July, we've got a £500,000 deficit on our revenue position. We're forecasting this will be down to 200k underspent by the end of the year. We are managing our pressures in year as we continue to operate within our existing funding envelope, so that's a constant challenge we're faced with. And on our capital spend, we've had minimal spend to date. We're looking at plans around that linked to our foundational improvement work, but it's potential that we won't utilise all of our capital this year. So they're the headlines from me, Chair, and I'll stop there for any comments or questions.
Chris, thank you very much indeed for that. I think I'll open it straight up for questions around the board. Aaron.
Thanks, Chris. Excuse me. You mentioned around some of the challenges in some of the areas. I just wanted to say a little bit about the mental health sector. We've had discussions within the mental health sector about the priority that it is for us around driving up both the volume and the quality of the mental health inspections. It's fundamental to what we do. It's been great to join some of our teams on those mental health inspections and understand some of the challenges from the perspective of the inspectors around getting those done, and it's been really good to join those teams. As a senior leadership team within mental health, we've been thinking about what measures we're going to put in place proactively to support our inspectors around performance, training and appraisal. So, and we're really very much looking forward to moving the operational teams into sector-specific teams. But yeah, I just wanted to mention the great work that's taking place and joining those inspection teams, but the priority is for us around driving up those inspections. Thanks.
Richard, and then Tolly.
Just one question, Chris. It's reassuring that we're ahead of trajectory on the total volume of assessments, but we don't seem to be moving the dial on the 10 weeks old, and that concerns me. There's either two things not right here. Either our target number of assessments is too small, we need to do more, or the way the assessments are being targeted, it's not prioritising the longest, and therefore we're not moving the dial on that. I just wonder if you've got any comment. We're roughly about 33 to 35% month on month, and you'd like to see that start to come down.
So I think there's two things at play here, Richard. I think we've got volume of assessments that we're tracking. We're trying to hit 9,000 by September 2026, and we've broken that down by sector. And then separate to that, we've got our volume of registrations that are coming in, which were handled by a separate team in CQC, and for that, that won't be a competing priority in terms of its. No, but it's an important point. Obviously, the volume of registrations, and that's one of our key priorities. But yeah, it's separate to our assessment work. Okay.
Chris.
But I think that it does illustrate a point that operational colleagues are working on, which is that balance between assessments that we're trying to address because they're old or aged, as it were, and therefore of less value to the public, and having to take assessments on because a risk is identified to our teams locally where we have to act on. That's a really fine balance, and that's one I think we're going to need to keep reflecting on and iterating as we go through over the course of the next year, and as we go into sector-specific teams, because that balance may be subtly different in each sector, and that's okay. I think we just need to be consistent rather than necessarily uniform on that, and be clear and transparent with the sectors that we are in charge of as well.
Tolly.
Thank you, Chair. And just to say in context of the finance, as we move into our sector-based structure, I'm certainly conscious that all our registered providers who are from the public sector will be battling significant financial problems. And I guess it's incumbent upon us, even if we're in the fortunate position of not being like that, to still have that scrutiny through our sectors and ensure that we're on top of our individual parts of our budget and understand why there are certain pressures. So, for example, MNSI it's a bit different. But nevertheless, just so that we understand those pressures, and I would imagine that our providers would look to us to ensure that we are as prudent with our spending as they are. Not unreasonable, I think. Thank you.
Paula.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to come back on Richard's comments earlier on in terms of the registration. Just a bit of a voiceover. So there is quite a lot of work that colleagues are doing to introduce quality improvement methods into that space. Some of the drivers is around domiciliary care and the volume of people coming forward to register, single person, single customer type of scenarios where we just have this enormous volume actually of single entities seeking to register themselves. And it's interesting when you see the effort that goes into getting the registration right, people then go immediately dormant. So there is something there about actually market forces and the impact that they're having, from an organizational point of view in our driving improvement in that area. That's not to say that, the data isn't what it is. I'm just trying to give a sense of the context in which this data is arising and the work that people are doing to try and streamline that process, screen out applications that really shouldn't be going forward in the first place, but recognizing work still needs to be done in that area.
Suze.
Thank you. I just wanted to come in on the mental health assessments, as I think it's really great that you've come in, Aaron, and that you've been curious and you've been out engaging with the team and seeing what it looks like on the front line. I guess a bit of the sentiment from our members in mental health that I wanted to share was that the message that we haven't reached a target and that new targets will be issued has created some nervousness that if we haven't reached a target, just increasing the target, as how do we get there without doing more, has felt quite uncomfortable for some people, as our staff are trying to do as much as they can, and if they're not meeting our current targets, how do we work with them and what needs to be tweaked or changed to support them to reach those targets rather than just expecting them to do more. And I don't think that's the approach you've come in with, but I think it shows us some of the nervousness of maybe the previous culture that we had in place of just get it done. And so, yeah, I'd appreciate either a discussion or just, to engage with the members in mental health about how that can be achieved sensitively. Yeah, they're trying to do a good job, and I see that you see that, but a numbers-based approach can often be a bit inhumane. Thanks.
And I think it's worth saying on that as we get back into the sectors, we will have to review what the numbers in each sector are and what's really needed. But we needed to get back into the sectors first with what people most naturally went to, and then we can review that. So I think that is we take that as a good update on where we are. Still a lot of challenges, we know, but definitely making progress at month 4. Can we move on now to the MNSI annual report? And Tolly, are you being joined by Sandy Lewis?
As far as I'm aware, I'll go and see if she's the... I've been told she's here. So.
No, that's good. Welcome, Sandy. Do you just want to introduce yourself so that people remembering that this is being streamed around the country and know who you are? But then I'll ask Tolly to introduce the item and then you to present.
Thank you. So my name is Sandy Lewis. I'm the Director of the Maternity and Newborn Safety Investigation Programme.
Over to you.
Oh, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Sandy, for being here to present. Just to remind colleagues that MNSI became hosted by CQC just short of 2 years ago, and it's a hosting arrangement, so it's important to preserve the independence of MNSI. But of course, the benefit for the regulator is having the relationships, the access to the tremendous learning that's generated from the work here. And some context really around the origins of MSNI. Sandy will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it sort of stems from the national maternity safety work about a decade ago, wasn't it? The safety ambition. And the ambition really was to halve the rates of stillbirth, neonatal death, maternal death by now, a decade later. And regrettably, that has not happened in relation to maternal death. And maternal death has plateaued and even risen, really, in the last 5 years. And there is a really stark set of inequalities apparent, both with the risk of dying in pregnancy or childbirth for a black woman, which is double, and also in relation to deprivation. So women from the most deprived areas, again, have double the risk of dying compared to women from, with not that level of deprivation. So the work of MNSI is all the more important. And, I guess I would want to say things that Sandy would probably be too modest to say, but I think it is just, fantastic work. And the relationships that they're able to build with their stakeholders, particularly families, are tremendous. And I think the ethos of seeking to investigate and learn without blaming really allows the extraction of so much more valuable information than otherwise would be. It's no secret to say there is a concern about some of the culture around maternity care now, and providers are anxious. And actually, an organisation like MNSI does terrific work with providers. I've recently been one, as you know, and I think the provider sector has a great deal of respect. So I just wanted to say that because I didn't think Sandy necessarily would, but I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Tolly. Thank you, colleagues. I'm here today to present the MNSI annual report, which is for 2024-25. But firstly, I'd really like to thank the families that we work with. They are an important part. They share their stories and their experiences at such tragic times in their lives. And our team work really closely. Without them, we would not be able to produce some of the interesting findings that we see from our investigations. This is also true of the trust and the staff that we work with, who their candour and their openness supports us to ensure that our investigations reflect the whole picture and not part of that picture. And I'd also like to thank my M&S team. Again, without the work they have undertaken, and I think our report reflects the many initiatives, the work they do above and beyond investigation work to support and develop the programme going forwards. So the report reflects our ambitions for 2024 and 25, and those ambitions remain and are continuing to grow over this next year. So we talk about thematic learning, we talk about equity, diversity and inclusion, and we talk about opportunities to maximise the impact of our work and investigation excellence. If I move quickly on in relation to our performance, so in the last year there's a minor error in this annual report which will be updated. We have progressed 618 investigations through to investigation. To date, we have given trusts 1,122 safety recommendations. Now that sounds vast, and I know there's lots of discussion out in the system about too many safety investigations. Ours are focused and agreed with trusts so that actually it's pieces of work they can go on locally. These are not national recommendations, they are local recommendations to support trusts with their services and the resources they require. We've also introduced safety prompts. Now, we often find in our investigations up until last year, there are occasions where we found interesting areas of learning, but we didn't have all the evidence behind it to make a safety recommendation. So the purpose of introducing a safety prompt supports us to say to a trust, have you thought about this? Here's a question for you, and to enable them to go and have a look and get a little bit more detail. It prompts the idea, it prompts a different way of asking trusts to think about how they learn. The other thing I'd just like to mention is since inception, we have completed over 4,000 investigations. So that goes back to 2018, and that milestone was reached this year. So a few key achievements I'd really like to draw everyone's attention to. Thematic learning. So with that completion of over 4,000 investigations, we are in a position where we have a wealth of knowledge and understanding how every hospital who's providing maternity care in the country, what work they're doing and where those themes sit. We often hear trusts say to us, a problem for them can feel enormous and unachievable, but it enables us to say to them, you're not here alone. Actually, this is a theme we see in many places. We are starting to present that work, and in the last year we have strengthened, and for 2025-26 we will continue to strengthen that work about how we are presenting that both nationally and internationally, and actually thinking how can we share and in what formats can we share so that learning becomes everything that a frontline clinician can look at, relate to, and actually be able to put into practice. We're strengthening our approach around collaboration. Prior to moving across to be hosted by CQC, we worked very much in an independent perspective, not really thinking and exploring how that collaboration could really benefit the wider system. I think this really focuses and strengthens the wider work around the maternity rapid review and other discussions that are going on in the maternity system at the moment, to think about how our work strengthens but reduces some of that duplication of work that's going on in other areas. In addition, we've started producing webinars, and we've had over 1,000 people sign up for our webinars. There is a huge amount of interest in the areas we're working. It creates a discussion, it creates a debate, and we often invite other stakeholders into those meetings to help us and assist us. We've produced an external bulletin, which now goes out to stakeholders, and within that we are putting in a safety spotlight. This comes back to another means of how do we share our learning. So we might see something in 2 or 3 investigations that we think is really important. An example of that is around exchange transfusions. An unusual, a rare event, but it enabled another organisation to support that and actually strengthen that message, and that came through in a spotlight. As part of producing our annual report this year, a commitment we made last year was to also publish all of the safety recommendations that we have made. We will be continuing that theme this year. It will be in a similar format, and that is a piece of work that we'll be concentrating on next year to ensure that format might look slightly different, and I will talk about that shortly. The themes that have come out of our safety recommendations this year relate to clinical assessment, escalation, guidance, clinical oversight and communication, and I anticipate in this room none of those are particularly a surprise. Another area of work that our team have been working on, and it's going from strength to strength, and listening to the previous conversation in the room, is around our health equity. We have developed a health equity tool And this tool and the toolkit that supports it enables in every one of our investigation reports to explore that EDI component with our families, often posing a mirror to them of things that they may not have seen for themselves. It's hugely strengthened the area of work. We look at protected characteristics, and this informs additional other work that we've been undertaking to think about how we ensure our investigations are as accessible as they possibly can be. Our work when we talk to families is about how can we communicate with you that provides you a mechanism that works. We know there's lots of areas which are talked about, but actually how much we know around that deprivation, particularly things like digital deprivation, and thinking about how does somebody who doesn't have a smartphone or a computer or access to one, how do they access this information? So there's a huge amount of work in relation to that. In relation to our Hart and Hughes, which is our equity toolkit, we launched that in December with our team, and we now have 6 months worth of data, and that's building on existing data, and that's starting to really demonstrate to us an interesting picture. We already have in place an extensive translation and language service. All of our reports and our interactions with our family are supported by language services, and at the request of a family we'll provide a report in the language that they request. To date, I think we're around 34 languages that we are translating our reports into. In addition to this, we've been doing some work around safety culture in organisations, and we have produced a piece of work called Compass. It comes off a piece of work that was done by the Patient Experience Library, which I believe Chris supported to be undertaken initially as part of CQC work. And we've adapted it to ask trusts and do some evaluation around what is the trust's culture or cultural approach to safety. And we are really mindful around that, reflecting in relation to our investigations, and that is our question around how do they manage that and how do they support that? How do they support their teams? How do they communicate with each other? How do they behave towards colleagues when they've experienced or been part of an event that for most colleagues we know impacts significantly on the decisions they make around their career? We've also been in work around our investigation development. So we've introduced a new report template, and this was important to introduce, to actually think about different approaches in different ways, and to bring our work up to date. It's really important that we do not sit back on our laurels and think that by producing one template supports the work we do. We've had very positive feedback from trusts. That introduction of safety prompts has been well received. We've recruited and trained 28 investigators. To recruit and train an investigator for our team takes approximately 6 months for the recruitment and 6 months to have them fully trained. It is an extensive process, and we cannot pick our team off a peg and ask them to get up and running with our work. It's the complexities of it and the work that we're asking, and therefore we are very privileged to have an experienced team. We've introduced a number of QA processes as well, because whilst we talk externally to our trusts and to our families and think about how we're learning, there's an important component of work is how we learn. So how are we learning around our processes? Are our processes robust? Are the quality of our reports the standard that we expect for every family and every trust to receive? The other area we're doing some work on is around our family and trust feedback. So we know that our family feedback, the numbers of families who feedback to us is low. We have some very positive feedback from our families, but is it truly representative of all the families we work with? There's further work to be done there. What we do know from the families who do feedback to us is they describe our work around that consistency. They feel heard, they feel respected, and they feel included in everything that we are doing. Likewise, we're doing some work with our trusts. So trusts, again, there's further work to do with them, and as part of some strategy work we've been doing, we've obviously heard some further feedback from them around areas of what we do well and other areas we could be thinking about. What they say to us, our processes are clear. They say we are improving the safety culture within their organisation. They feel the interviews and the work that we do with the staff at trusts is open, it's focused, and it does not apportion blame. And many staff come back to us and reflect that as well. So finally, I just wanted to touch on some of those next steps of the work that we're undertaking that's reflected within this report. We are currently doing a piece of work around our strategy. This is to continue to grow and develop and ensure that work going forward remains focused and in relation to our families remaining central, but we continue that collaboration and that work that we are doing. We're doing a piece of work around coding and AI work. This will really inform our thematic work and really enable us to demonstrate what we are seeing from our themes and the evidence base behind them. I've already touched on the family and the trust feedback. I've touched on improving the processes. Working within the system is another key component. We are part of those conversations around the maternity rapid review. And we are building innovation is another area, and we will continue to do so over the next year. That is the conclusion for our annual report. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much indeed, Sandy, for that. I'll open it up for discussion. I mean, this is a report from you to us, which we then make, or you will then publish. So it's written, and we have to sort of approve it to be published, but that will do. Tolly, did you want to add anything?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Sandy. I'd be particularly interested to learn more when the time comes about the Compass tool, because I guess there's also a link with our well-led, that look at culture in an area. The complexity around maternity care and the multidisciplinary nature of the care provision, I think, means that the culture is really important. And it would just be, I think, fascinating to see what you find from it and how it will be applied, and as I say, how it links into our regulation through well-led. Thank you.
Bola.
Thank you, Tolly and Sandy, and thanks for a very comprehensive report. Just in terms of looking forward and working with others, it occurs to me NHS resolution. So mindful that they do have the maternity incentive scheme, and I'm not always clear what the mechanism for actually tracking the data that sits behind trusts' submissions of compliance with that scheme, given the statistics that Tolly has already shared with the board. So it really is just a suggestion that it's perhaps one of the most powerful structural levers that we have to genuinely drive improvement in this space. But I'm not entirely clear what our role could be in just ascertaining the extent to which that lever is doing what NHS resolution intended. And I say that in the context of maternity safety incidents being by a long mile the largest contributor to the claims burden on the NHS from a financial point of view.
So if I can respond to that. So we work very closely with NHS resolution. So we co-own Safety Action 10 as part of the maternity incentive scheme. And that safety action is around reporting of incidents, it's around being compliant with duty of candour, and also about sharing information about the work MNSI do and the work NHSR do in a format that every family can understand. We're just in the process of reviewing the MIS scheme alongside NHS resolution and thinking about, is there more that we could do? And partly because that it associates purely with babies who've experienced harm. And so there's some question around one area we struggle with. We have no remit to ensure that our safety recommendations have been implemented. And there's a sort of a thought, is there something more we could do within that safety action to seek further assurance and from trusts? But we're working very closely with NHS resolution in that area.
And Bob, if I can just add to that, I think it's something that, as we do our maternity inspections, we need to be assuring ourselves that those 10 safety actions really are in place. So that may be something more that comes back to us. In fact, when Sandy and I were talking just a few weeks ago, one of the things we need to make sure is that the linkage between MNSI and CQC is better. You're hosted by us, but and this is not blaming MNSI. I think when we were not in sectors and not having relationship owners for individual trusts, it was very difficult for MNSI to know who to communicate if they had a concern. Who should they communicate that to? And that was, you know, so by getting back to having relationship owners, that could be solved. Chris.
Thanks. It's a really comprehensive report. Thank you. I'm really pleased that you're using the Red Flags report to sort of give shape how we all collectively understand early warnings of concerns, and I'd be really interested in having a conversation with you about how you're using that information and perhaps how we can learn from that as well. I think the second point for me is, and it's a golden thread through the report, how we build trust with people that are using maternity services alongside people that are using services more generally, and how we hear their voice and how we act on their concerns is something that I think we have collective intent around. So again, it'd be interesting to think about what we can do collectively to act on that voice, to make sure we're collectively hearing the voice of people and using it to drive change.
Richard.
This is very much a layperson's question, but I can't. Ought I to be encouraged? I think you don't meet the criteria. That's fine. I think I'm encouraged by that, but tell me if that's the wrong interpretation. Flip side of it is, how would we know, how would you know, if trusts were not referring things that they should? Have you got another kind of correlation, say, or BCS codes or something else that kind of could make sure that wasn't the case?
So if I take those in two parts, in relation to our investigations that are rejected, we require consent from families to progress an investigation. Sorry. So we require consent to progress an investigation, and so some families don't consent for us to take forward that investigation, so we can't do those. There is an element of duplication sometimes around referrals, and then the other part is they don't meet our criteria. We encourage trusts to refer everything they suspect, and therefore we can then make the decisions about whether that does meet our criteria or not. In relation to trust referring, so we do some verification work for our severe brain injury babies, and we do map that against a national data set. We think the numbers are right. Could I absolutely say that I believe we're getting all the referrals? I can't, because it's really difficult to map around data sets to ensure that data set is correct and we know everything's being referred. We do have some great relationships with trusts, and we do intermittently ask those questions to support them to ensure they are referring things. There are occasions which trusts will come back to us and say maybe our processes weren't quite right, and we'll do a look-back exercise with them, and that may bear a few more cases. But you know, overall, we don't have an entirely robust sort of data set system to map everything against to ensure we're getting everything we believe we should.
And I think it's just worth adding to that, again, conversation I was having with Sandy, the criteria that you work to are pretty tight. Yes, it's all maternal deaths, but it's, I think in terms of stillbirths, it's only intrapartum and only 37 weeks plus. So it's quite a tight one. And I think one of the things we need to look at is how this is working alongside the new perinatal mortality review tool, where the last report I've seen on that covered 4,000 in the last year or so, which is a wider pool of adverse outcomes. So we need to look at that alongside each other. Tolly.
No, thank you, Chair. And if I might just say, I guess, for the record, to make explicit what I know we all know, but when we talk about maternal death, and forgive me for using a very technical term, as it were, but it is the tip of the iceberg of a huge amount of harm that comes to women. And so it's obviously a very definable metric, but, you know, it's just us being conscious of all that amount of harm that's going on as well. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for that. So I think on that note, the board is asked to receive this report and approve it for publication. I see everybody's nodding their heads, so the answer is yes to that.
Thank you.
So next we have the Research and Evaluation Annual Report, and Bola, you're going to lead us off on this.
Thank you, Chair. So I just want to acknowledge the work of Gillian Marsden, our colleague, and colleagues who work in the CQC's research and evaluation team, and the work that they've done in putting this annual report together. Just to start by saying that research is a core element of the work that the CQC does. And indeed, it's done in collaboration with other organisations, as set out in the report, including the King's Fund, the This Institute at the University of Cambridge, and others. And I think that really strengthens the quality of output that we derive. Also to say that the research priorities and areas of focus seek to align with the CQC's priorities, particularly in the context of the conversation we've been having around the 4+5. So wanted to just set that out clearly to the board. In the annex, we set out, colleagues have set out the research activities done in 24-25 and the impact that that has had. I wanted to draw out particularly the evidence review in relation to the dementia strategy, which board received at its last meeting in June. Also to talk about the research piece around inequalities in maternity care, picking up the point of the MNSI annual report that we've just received. Also in terms of the prevention of mortality in mental health settings, again picking up on the conversations with Aaron throughout the course of today's meeting. There is also a piece of work that was done in understanding the systemic issues that may affect the CQC's rating of GP practices, particularly those who are operating in some of the most socio-economically deprived areas of the country, and how the CQC's regulation of those services could actually be impacted by the context in which they are operating. Finally, to draw out the regulatory model evaluation that they did and how that is impacting and supporting the further work that is being done now around the assessment framework and other areas in the foundational improvement. So I just wanted to call out those specific areas in terms of the research that has been done and the positive impact that that is having on the organisation. Looking forward, the Chief Inspector now being in post, we will be working with Gillian and our colleagues to actually determine what are the next priority areas for research that align very precisely with the priorities that we're setting out as an organisation. We think it's an incredibly important resource, but even more so, the more closely it's aligned with our organisational priorities. In terms of governance, just to say that the governance of the work is another important area. Esther and I have been working with the team to just think about the process by which we arrive at our research priorities going forward, how chief inspectors are very much involved in that conversation early, and also how we review and sign off publications going forward, particularly those that are public-facing. So just really to acknowledge the important work that colleagues have done as set out in the report, and to give the board a sense of how we are seeking to work with them around the governance, but also in terms of the priority areas as we go forward. And I'll stop there for feedback and reflections. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for introducing it. I think, am I right in saying that this is research to inform how we can do our job better, basically, and so that's got to be at the centre of our thinking about research. How are we going to be able to inspect? How are we going to be able to rate? How are we going to be able to enforce, whatever it may be? What research will be useful? And I think the partnership that we have with external organisations like the THIS Institute or the King's Fund are really important in that regard. I think it came up earlier about how, what do we mean by outstanding? There is some work going on there. So I think it's an important function, but it's one that I think now we've got the chief inspectors in place, we can really think what's going to be most valuable with inevitably a limited resource. Any questions or comments that people want to make on that? Seems to have captured it then, so that's good on that one. That then takes us on to item 7, the Equality Network and the Trade Union updates. Susie, you going first on this one?
I think we haven't decided who was going first, but we're
You're
both prepared.
first on my list, so there we go.
Amazing. Well, thank you very much for the discussions today. I think we'll continue with what we started off at the last board session and have 3 key headlines that we'd like as a trade union side to share with our board members. And I've kind of covered some of them, I've touched on them in previous parts, I guess because they are far-reaching. So what we have to share today is we feel like the accountability for the CQC way is key to the cultural change. I spoke about this around the Freedom to Speak Up report. And I think I want to focus this about where the peer-to-peer conversations aren't possible, because I think some of the launch of it is about getting to a place where we can have those discussions. I think it's a phrase of call them in before calling them out, or calling them out before calling them in. I never get that the right way around, but I like the attitude of it. But I think we need to have some accountability and some extra protections in place for where those discussions aren't possible, especially where there's an imbalance of power. It does link in with the Psychological Safety Week and the inclusion activity, and so I think it's a real pertinent point at the minute. The second point was around our adherence to the Equality Act, and this one's a bit of a sensitive one. It was highlighted in our Listening, Learning and Responding to Concerns report in 2023 that there was concerns that we weren't adhering fully to our Equality Act. I'm not too sure there's been much progress in some areas, and while there are pockets of good practice and activity across CQC, we as a union side are still seeing that we're missing some of the basics in other areas, and so there are hotspots of poor activity, and this is in terms of people having reasonable adjustments in place, which links to the how are we using the workplace passports, are they effective, are they leading to the right conversations and the right support measures being put in place for individuals. And we have examples recently where our disabled colleagues are having issues with the health and safety elements of our REG platform, and despite that being a well-known issue to this board, those local conversations are still requiring trade union input and escalation of concerns to get some of the basic adjustments that are in place that have been agreed or in workplace passports. And so I think we'd like to look at where we're getting it wrong, because unless we're getting it right for everybody, we're still slightly failing, and the Equality Act and the legal obligation doesn't have exceptions. And then the third point, I'm trying to be very quick, is I think I've mentioned it before, but we just have a lot of activity planned and underway, and while it's valuable and we need to get so much done to recover, to improve and to be a really effective regulator, I think we'd like to ask us as a collective to be mindful of the impact that has on individuals. We have a lot of fatigued colleagues, and so I know change fatigue has been mentioned, and so I feel like that sentiment is felt by the board, but a bit more of consideration where somebody might be in an area that's considered low priority. Because we're trying to do so much, there are some people where the changes that will make their jobs easier or make their daily life at CQC that little bit smoother might be quite far down the line, and so that is part of our roadmap and our plans, but also to be mindful when we pause activity because something has a greater priority, but how do we put some of that wraparound support for those people who don't feel that lower priority, that their area being a lower priority isn't felt personally, or that their work isn't being valued by CQC. I do appreciate, Julian, that you acknowledged the trauma that a lot of our staff have felt and the difficult period of people have gone through. I think we need to keep that at the forefront of our minds, because until we prove to people we're doing something different, there is going to be a lot of nervousness that we haven't changed, or that things are being done in an old way. But yes, I think overall we are trying to do a lot, and we do have colleagues, as I said, that are really invested in making CQC a top-class regulator. And so yeah, just let's remember that we're all people at the end of the day, and whilst we're trying to do everything, we can get further by being mindful of each other, and just that little bit of wraparound, and sometimes the little things have the biggest impact. So good communication delivered on time not hearing from a colleague about a decision that's made about your area before you've had the communication directly. And yeah, and I think that will positively contribute to our cultural change. Thanks.
Sue's three very, very good points there, I think, and well noted. Drew, do you want to?
It's a very hard act to follow.
Very difficult.
I'm not going to repeat, but I'll certainly echo a lot of the sentiment that Sue's referred to is also echoed within our membership as well, in respect of particularly system challenges and such. I want to celebrate a few things that we've done within the Equality Networks over the past few months. I mentioned it earlier on, but certainly our attendance at some of the LGBT events that have occurred over the past few months throughout the country, during which we asked attendees to tell us what good care looks like for them. Very good engagement around those. We have various boards that people have attributed to, and they've voted on what that looked like. Sadly, a lot of that was the basics. It was the fundamentals of care that we would expect of any other service. What that has helped us to do is to start thinking about how that translates to our assessment programme, what that looks like when we go out to inspect, what questions are we asking, and how do we equip our colleagues to ask the right questions and look for the right things, but also understand what those answers mean. So early work that's began around that, and how we, as I say, make sure our colleagues are equipped to be culturally competent, if we want to use that phrase. We also, during those events, offered people the opportunity to use a dedicated QR code that took them to our Give Feedback on Care service. We saw the uptake of that, usage of that unique QR code, aligning with the kind of the national standard for leafleting campaigns. So really happy to see that that was a success in that respect. We'll hopefully be doing so again in the future as well. Really good opportunity for us to get CQC out there and show that we are approachable, but also that people can share their experiences with us and help influence the outcomes for LGBT plus people in health and social care. We want to acknowledge the launch of the NHS LGBT Health Inequalities Review. I think it's a really important piece of work. We look forward to working with colleagues around the room and across the organisation on how we respond to the findings whenever they're inevitably published. One concern for our members in some pockets is the publication of the Equality and Human Rights Commission's guidance following the Supreme Court judgment earlier this year. This will understandably have implications on both our work as an employer and as a regulator. We're very keen to work alongside colleagues, again, in various parts of the organisation, to consider that implementation when the guidance is published, in how we maintain dignity and respect for all those working at CQC and receiving health and care. And more broadly, a concern for members is also the current external climate around migration. I'm keen that the organisation considers the impact that this may have both on our colleagues working at CQC and our host organisations, but also the wider impact across health and social care. We're already hearing first-hand challenges that employers have in regards to recruitment, retention, and sustainable delivery, given the pressure that is on certain parts of the wider community. So just an ask for the organisation to consider what that looks like internally, and also on delivery of safe and effective care. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Drew, for that. Any comments on what we've heard either from Suze or Drew? I think there's a lot of support that I'm hearing from what you've both said. If that's the case, we're now into any other business, and also, unless there's any, is there any other business from people around the table? First of all, David.
I have one piece, if I may, Mike. It's really about the non-executive directors. We've heard that we're going to have the arena event coming up in November, which is marvellous. And also, of course, we've been invited very warmly to join the inspection teams. Again, that's excellent. But I would mention that every 2 weeks we have the leadership team briefing sessions, and these only last about an hour. I find them immensely useful because they're led by a different person most of the time, so you get a different viewpoint, and the questions demonstrate to me, you know, the engagement of our staff, etc. And they are a fabulous learning experience. It's only an hour every 2 weeks. And I just would encourage, if I may, through you, Mike, my non-executive director colleagues to see if they can join that, because it is such a good experience.
Thank you very much for that, David. We can certainly inform non-executive colleagues about when these meetings are going on, so that if they have time, they will be very welcome to join them. I'm looking at Chris Day, who is nodding his head vigorously, so we'll make sure that at least the information about that, and then people can decide whether they've got the time to do that. But thank you for bringing that up. I think we now...
Just
yes,
one thing, just one thing, and my apologies, I neglected to make the connection earlier, Mike, when I was talking about the business plan, so just to cover that off, just important to note, cast your minds back to the business plan. We wanted to say that we're planning to make sure we reflect the audit recommendations in that as part of that, because it was important, Chris, wasn't it, that we gather the appropriate recommendations learning from the audit that we've been through as part of our planning for the next several months. But just important point I neglected to make earlier, Mike, apologies, but just to cover that off for the record.
That's fine, noted, and we can bring that together. We now have the opportunity for questions that have already been sent in to us from people outside, and I think people have been warned as to who is going to address them. There's a question coming from Tony Benfield about timescales for re-inspection and how quickly we can do re-inspections. And Chris, are you going to tackle that one?
Yes, thank you for the question, Tony. Just to slightly correct your premise about the question just talks about how things have changed. So the 2008 Act actually sets out our statutory functions, including our requirement to publish what's called a statement of frequency, outlining how we'll inspect in organisations. This hasn't changed since the Act in 2008. As you'll be aware from the conversation today, the independent review has led us to prioritise 4 immediate actions, one of which is about increasing the number of inspections. Currently, we average just over a year to come back to services that are inadequate. There are many services obviously will be expected more frequently than that, but we know we need to improve this. As I said elsewhere in the meeting, our regulatory approach is currently being updated, and particularly looking at our assessment framework and how we improve it. Once we've confirmed our new approach, we intend to introduce a frequency schedule for individual organisations in each of the sectors that we regulate. And this will take into account previous ratings and other factors such as emerging risks. However, this does not prevent us from going back into assessing providers quickly. I think Chris mentioned earlier that we know that we do follow up on risk immediately all the time, so that we will continue to look at risk and emerging risk as part of our the requirements to go back in. But just to try and answer that question directly, we will publish that frequency again once we've completed the work on the assessment framework.
Thank you, Chris, very much for that. I think the next 2 questions are probably for me. Why has CQC reduced the number of its board inspections in public from 8 in 2010 with members of the public in attendance to 5 in 2025 with no members of the public in attendance? Well, in terms of members of the public in attendance, it's partly because of the space that we have here, and it's partly that we do, of course, stream these meetings so that anybody can watch them and can watch them on catch-up if it's more convenient. But alongside that, what we have done for some time now is to enable people in advance to submit their questions. I think by getting them submitted in advance, we actually get better answers to them, frankly, than if we're just taken by surprise. In terms of the numbers of board meetings, I don't think there is a right number of board meetings. At the moment, we've scheduled 4 or 5 per annum, as public board meetings, on top of which we have board strategy days, which I think at this stage is particularly important as we evolve our new approach to inspection and where the strategy should go. People will know that we have a duty set for us in the 10-year plan to become amongst the best health and care regulators in the world. That's going to require a lot of thought. We also have a governance review underway at the moment, and one of the things that we can reconsider as part of that is what the frequency of different boards and sub-board meetings should be. So that is all in hand. The next question, which also comes from Robin Pike, says, why has CQC's regulation of maternity services been ineffective? Well, it may not have been as good as it might be, but it hasn't been totally ineffective in that we did a round of 131 maternity services in 22-23, and almost half of those inspections were rated either requires improvement or inadequate. So I think we were amongst the first that were really demonstrating the breadth of problem that there is in maternity services. That does not mean that we couldn't do better in terms of our maternity inspections. Just a few minutes ago we were talking about the 10 safety actions. Are we rigorously looking at that, for example? Are we making use of the fact that trusts now do undertake their own perinatal mortality reviews? Are we looking sufficiently at the culture within maternity services? Are we looking at the leadership at trust level of maternity services? So we are very actively looking at all of these issues, and I'm taking a personal lead on that for CQC for the time being. So we're not complacent about this at all, but it's not fair to say that we have missed everything. We certainly haven't, but we can do better. So I think the final question is coming to you, Chris Asher. What measures is CQC taking to reduce its overall expenditure?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So I think it's important to note we've not changed our fee scheme since 2019-20. This means for most providers they won't have seen a fee change unless it's linked to a variable in that sector. It also means over that time that we've had to absorb any inflation, whether that's pay or predominantly pay inflation or non-pay. So really for us it's about living within our means and our existing funding envelope and ensuring that we manage our expenditure appropriately to deliver on that, which I hope helps.
Thank you. Any other comments that people want to make? If not, I think I will draw this meeting to a conclusion at 4:45, so we're actually ahead of our target time. So thank you all very much indeed.